You have been spending nights awake thinking about the same things that hurt you, haven't you? That feeling that your mind never shuts off, that suffering is always there, waiting for the right moment to come back and torment you. You have already tried to ignore it, tried to think positive, tried to force yourself to be happy, but none of that truly worked. And do you know why? Because you are fighting suffering in the wrong way. Buddhist masters discovered millennia ago that the secret to eliminating suffering from your mind is not in fighting against it, but in deeply understanding where it comes from and how it feeds on your thoughts. When you understand that suffering is not something external that happens to you, but rather a reaction of your own mind to life situations, everything begins to change. This video will reveal to you the Buddhist secrets that completely transform the way you relate to your own pain. You can even prepare to sleep while you listen, because these truths will work on your subconscious and bring a peace you have not felt in a long time. Subscribe to the channel. Leave your like and comment from which part of the world you are watching. Get comfortable and relax. Let us begin. Have you ever wondered why suffering seems so universal, touching every human life regardless of wealth, status, dot, or circumstance? This fundamental question troubled Siddhartha Gautama too, until his awakening as the Buddha led to perhaps the most profound framework for understanding and overcoming human suffering ever articulated. The Four Noble Truths form the cornerstone of Buddhist philosophy, representing the Buddha's first and most essential teaching after his enlightenment. Think of them as both a diagnosis and treatment plan for the human condition. The Buddha, often compared to a physician, didn't just identify our collective ailment, but offered a comprehensive path to its cure. The first noble truth acknowledges what we all know but often try to deny, that suffering, or dukkha, is an inevitable part of existence. This suffering takes many forms, from obvious physical pain and emotional distress to subtle dissatisfaction that persists even in seemingly happy moments. What makes this truth powerful isn't just the recognition that suffering exists, that's obvious to anyone who has lived, but the assertion that suffering is woven into the very fabric of conditioned existence. Even pleasant experiences ultimately bring suffering because they don't last, leaving us craving more. The Buddha wasn't being pessimistic. He was being honest about a reality we all face, acknowledging this truth directly, without sugarcoating or avoidance, is actually the first step toward freedom, moving to the second noble truth. The Buddha identified the cause of suffering as craving or attachment, tanha. This isn't just about material desires or obvious addictions. It's about our fundamental habit of grasping, wanting things to be different than they are, clinging to pleasure, rejecting discomfort, and constantly seeking more or different experiences. Our minds create a gap between how things are and how we want them to be. And in that gap, suffering grows. We attach to ideas about ourselves, to relationships, to possessions, even to viewpoints and beliefs, creating expectations that reality inevitably disappoints. The Buddha observed that this pattern of craving operates in three main ways: craving for sensory pleasures, craving for existence, wanting to be or become, and craving for non-existence, wanting to avoid or escape. These cravings keep us in constant tension, never fully satisfied with what is. The tremendous hope of Buddhism lies in the third noble truth, which declares that suffering can end. This isn't just wishful thinking, but a direct observation from the Buddha's own experience. If suffering arises from craving and attachment, then the complete cessation of that craving leads to the complete cessation of suffering. This state, called nirvana or nibbana, represents total freedom from the mental patterns that create distress. It's important to understand that the third truth doesn't promise a life without pain, physical discomfort, aging, sickness, and death remain realities, but it offers freedom from the extra layer of suffering we add through our resistance, aversion, and attachment. A person who has realized this truth might experience physical pain but without the mental anguish that typically accompanies it. They might face life's challenges without being emotionally shattered by them. The fourth noble truth is where theory meets practice. Here, the Buddha outlined the Noble Eightfold Path, a comprehensive approach to transforming one's life and mind. This path isn't a sequential checklist, but an integrated way of living that addresses how we understand reality, right view and right intention, how we interact with others, right speech, right action, and right livelihood, and how we train our minds, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. Following this path progressively weakens the habits of mind that generate suffering and strengthens those that lead to its cessation. What makes the Four Noble Truths so powerful is their practical, experiential nature. The Buddha didn't ask his followers to accept these teachings on faith alone. Instead, he invited them to test these principles in the laboratory of their own experience. Do you suffer? Examine the nature of that suffering closely. Does it intensify when you cling to how you want things to be? Does it diminish when you practice letting go? This empirical approach makes Buddhism less a belief system and more a methodology for transformation. The Four Noble Truths also work at different levels of understanding. At the most basic level, they encourage ethical living and mindfulness to reduce obvious suffering. At deeper levels, they invite profound examination of the nature of self and reality that can lead to complete liberation. This makes them accessible and beneficial regardless of where someone is on their spiritual journey. In daily life, the Four Noble Truths offer practical guidance for handling everything from minor annoyances to major life crises. When stuck in traffic, feeling frustrated with a colleague, or facing serious illness, we can apply this framework. We acknowledge the suffering present, first truth. Recognize how our resistance or craving intensifies it, second truth. Remember that freedom from this additional suffering is possible, third truth. And apply aspects of the Eightfold Path like mindfulness and wise perspective, fourth truth. Modern psychology has increasingly validated many aspects of this ancient framework. Cognitive behavioral therapy, mindfulness-based interventions, and acceptance-based approaches all echo elements of the Four Noble Truths. Research shows that fighting against uncomfortable experiences often amplifies them, while mindful acceptance can reduce suffering, precisely what the Buddha taught 25 centuries ago. What's particularly remarkable about the Four Noble Truths is their universality. They don't require adoption of any cultural or religious trappings, nor do they conflict with other faith traditions. They simply offer a clear-eyed assessment of the human condition and a practical path forward. Whether in ancient India or the modern digital age, the fundamental patterns of human suffering and its causes remain remarkably consistent. The Buddha compared understanding the Four Noble Truths to the gradual process of healing. First comes diagnosis, recognizing suffering, then identifying its cause, craving and attachment, then recognizing that healing is possible, cessation of suffering, and finally following the treatment plan, the Eightfold Path. This medical metaphor emphasizes that Buddhism is fundamentally practical, concerned with alleviating real suffering rather than building elaborate philosophical systems. Ultimately, the Four Noble Truths invite a radical shift in how we relate to our experience. Instead of constantly reaching for pleasure and pushing away pain, an exhausting and ultimately futile strategy, we learn to meet each moment with awareness and equanimity. This doesn't mean becoming passive or indifferent, but developing a wiser relationship with life as it unfolds. The promise of this approach is nothing less than profound freedom, not by escaping the realities of human existence, but by transforming our relationship to them. Impermanence, anicca, accepting the transitory nature of reality. Look around you for a moment. The device you're using to hear these words, your body, your thoughts, the weather outside, All of these are in a state of constant change. Nothing stays the same from one moment to the next. This simple observation forms the foundation of one of Buddhism's most profound and liberating insights: impermanence, or anicca in Pali, the language of the earliest Buddhist texts. Impermanence isn't just an abstract philosophical concept. It's a fundamental characteristic of everything we experience. From the cosmic scale of stars and galaxies to the microscopic world of cells and atoms, change is the only constant. Mountains erode, oceans shift, civilizations rise and fall. Our bodies transform completely over time, with cells dying and regenerating so thoroughly that, physically speaking, you're not the same person you were 7 years ago. Even our minds are in constant flux, with thoughts and emotions coming and going like weather patterns. The Buddha considered the recognition of impermanence so crucial that he called it one of the 3 marks of existence, alongside suffering, dukkha, and non-self, anatta. Why did he place such emphasis on this seemingly obvious fact? Because despite its obviousness, we humans have a remarkable capacity to ignore impermanence and live as though things will remain as they are indefinitely. We build identities, relationships, and life plans on the assumption of permanence, setting ourselves up for shock and distress when change inevitably occurs. Think about how much suffering comes from resistance to change. We feel devastated when relationships end, when youth and health decline, when career paths shift unexpectedly, or when prized possessions break or disappear. It's not just the changes themselves that cause suffering, but our opposition to them, our inner insistence that this shouldn't be happening, or things should stay as they were. We cling to pleasant experiences, hoping to make them permanent, and push away unpleasant ones, hoping they'll never return. Both strategies are doomed to fail in a reality where everything is in flux. The Buddha wasn't suggesting we become passive or fatalistic about change. Rather, he was pointing to the freedom that comes from aligning our expectations and actions with reality as it actually is. When we deeply understand and accept impermanence, we can stop exhausting ourselves by fighting against the nature of existence itself. We can engage with life more skillfully, making wise choices based on how things really are rather than how we wish they would stay. Buddhist practice offers many ways to cultivate this acceptance. Meditation, particularly mindfulness practice, trains us to observe change directly in our moment-to-moment experience. Sitting quietly and watching the breath, we notice how each inhale and exhale differs slightly from the one before. Sensations arise, transform and disappear. Thoughts bubble up and dissolve. Even strong emotions, when closely observed without resistance, reveal themselves to be fluid processes rather than solid states. Outside formal meditation, we can bring awareness to impermanence in daily life. Notice how your energy levels fluctuate throughout the day. Observe how your mood shifts in response to different circumstances. Watch the changing seasons, the aging process in yourself and loved ones, the way food transforms from fresh to spoiled. Without adding judgment or resistance, simply acknowledge. This too is changing. One powerful practice involves contemplating the impermanence of the body. While this might sound morbid to Western ears, Buddhist traditions have long recognized its transformative potential. By calmly reflecting on the aging process and the inevitability of death, we cut through denial and come into a more honest relationship with our finite existence. Far from being depressing, this honest acknowledgement can infuse life with urgency, meaning, and appreciation. Accepting impermanence doesn't mean we stop caring or making efforts to create positive conditions. On the contrary, understanding change allows us to work more effectively with it. We can plant beneficial seeds in the present, knowing they'll grow into future experiences. We can engage in learning, healing, and personal development, knowing that positive change is as much a part of reality as unwelcome change. The difference is that we act without the burden of expecting permanent results, which paradoxically makes our actions more joyful and effective. Impermanence also offers tremendous hope. If everything is changing, then difficult situations aren't permanent. Depression lifts, grief evolves, conflicts transform. No matter how stuck a situation might seem, change is already underway beneath the surface. This understanding has supported countless people through periods of suffering that seemed unbearable in the moment. The wisdom traditions of East Asia developed particularly beautiful expressions of impermanence. Japanese aesthetics, influenced by Buddhism, celebrate the poignant beauty of transience in concepts like mono no aware, the pathos of things, and wabi-sabi, the beauty of imperfection and impermanence. Cherry blossoms are cherished precisely because their blooming is so brief. Broken pottery is repaired with gold in the kintsugi technique, honoring rather than hiding the object's history of change. In relationships, acknowledging impermanence can transform how we love. Instead of clinging to a fixed image of our partner or expecting them to fulfill our needs permanently, we can appreciate them as they are in this moment, knowing both of us are continuously changing. Each encounter becomes precious because it will never be repeated in exactly the same way. This non-grasping love creates space for authentic connection without the suffocation of possessiveness. Modern science has validated the Buddha's observations about impermanence at every level. Physics shows us that seemingly solid matter is mostly empty space filled with vibrating energy. Biology reveals our bodies as dynamic processes rather than static objects. Neuroscience demonstrates that our brains are constantly rewiring themselves based on experience. Psychology confirms that personality traits we consider fixed are more malleable than previously thought. Even at the cosmic scale, we now understand that the universe itself is expanding and transforming, with stars being born and dying every moment. The ultimate freedom in accepting impermanence comes from loosening our grip on fixed identity. When we stop defining ourselves by temporary conditions, a particular role, relationship, possession, or physical attribute, we discover something more fundamental that remains amid the changes. Some Buddhist traditions describe this as our Buddha nature or original face, not a permanent self, but an open awareness that can accommodate all the changes without being defined by them. Practically speaking, embracing impermanence helps us prioritize what truly matters. Knowing that life is fleeting, we might spend less time on trivial concerns and more on meaningful connections and contributions. Knowing that opportunities won't last forever, we might act with more courage and less procrastination. Knowing that material possessions inevitably decay, we might invest more in experiences and relationships that enrich our brief time here. The wisdom of impermanence doesn't ask us to deny the pain of loss or the joy of pleasant experiences. It simply invites us to hold all experiences more lightly, without the additional suffering that comes from demanding permanence in an impermanent world. In this acceptance lies a profound peace, not because we've escaped change, but because we've stopped fighting it. This profound wisdom of impermanence naturally leads us to another fundamental insight the Buddha discovered, the concept of non-self, or anatta. If everything is constantly changing, then what exactly can we point to as a permanent, unchanging self? This question takes us to the heart of Buddhist psychology and its revolutionary understanding of identity. The concept of non-self challenges our most basic assumptions about who we are. From early childhood, we develop a strong sense of being a separate, continuous entity with definite boundaries and inherent qualities. We say, I am this or that, intelligent or not, attractive or plain, successful or struggling, as if these descriptions capture some fixed essence. We construct elaborate narratives about our past and future, cementing the impression of a solid self moving through time. This sense of separate selfhood feels so intuitively obvious that questioning it might seem absurd. Yet when we look closely at our experience, as the Buddha encouraged, something remarkable happens. We cannot find any permanent, unchanging core that could be called a self. Our bodies are constantly changing, as we've seen. Our thoughts and emotions arise and pass like clouds, often contradicting each other from moment to moment. Our preferences, opinions, and even personality traits shift subtly or dramatically throughout life. Memory, which seems to provide continuity, is notoriously unreliable and constantly being revised. If we try to locate exactly where or what the self is, it keeps slipping through our fingers. The Buddha described what we call a person as a dynamic process rather than a fixed entity. He analyzed human experience into 5 aggregates or components: physical form, sensations, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. Each of these aspects is constantly changing and interdependent with the others. None of them, individually or collectively, can be identified as a permanent self. It's like trying to find the river apart from the flowing water. There's only the process, not a thing behind the process. This insight doesn't mean we don't exist at all, clearly. There's something happening here. Rather, it reveals that what we call self is more like a verb than a noun, a continuous flow of experience rather than a solid entity. The Buddha compared it to a chariot, which is just a functional name for a collection of parts working together. Remove the wheels, axles, chassis, and so forth. And where is the chariot? Similarly, our sense of self is a useful convention, a practical way to organize experience, but not an ultimate reality. Why did the Buddha consider this understanding so important? Because the illusion of a separate, permanent self creates enormous suffering. When we believe we have a solid self to protect and promote, we become trapped in constant anxiety. We compare ourselves to others, feeling superior or inferior. We take criticism personally. We fear change and loss because they threaten our sense of who we are. We divide the world into me and mine versus other, setting the stage for conflict and alienation. The belief in a separate self also drives the endless cycle of craving and aversion. We constantly seek experiences, possessions, and achievements that we believe will enhance our self, while avoiding or rejecting anything that threatens it. But since this self is ultimately an illusion, no amount of acquiring or avoiding ever brings lasting satisfaction. It's like trying to decorate a house that exists only in a dream. Letting go of this fixed idea of self doesn't mean losing our functional identity or becoming irresponsible. On the contrary, understanding non-self allows us to live more authentically and responsively, without the burden of defending and promoting a rigid self-image. We can engage with life more directly and spontaneously. We can hold our identities more lightly, as useful conventions rather than absolute truths. This insight transforms how we experience difficulties. When something painful happens, instead of the contracted reaction of "this is happening to me" with all its associated resentment and resistance, we can experience it more spaciously as "this is happening," a process unfolding in awareness. The suffering of taking things personally begins to dissolve. Non-self also opens the door to genuine compassion. When we see that the boundaries between self and other are more fluid and conventional than we thought, caring for others becomes as natural as caring for ourselves. We recognize our fundamental interconnection with all life. This isn't an abstract philosophical position, but a direct experience that emerges as the self-illusion thins. Practically speaking, how do we explore non-self in daily life? Mindfulness meditation offers a direct path. By observing our experience closely, we begin to notice how thoughts, emotions, and sensations arise and pass without a central controller. We see how the sense of I is constructed moment by moment through identification with certain aspects of experience. Over time, this constant witnessing naturally loosens our grip on fixed identity. We can also investigate self directly through contemplative inquiry. When a strong sense of I arises, perhaps during an emotional reaction, a moment of pride, or a period of worry about the future, we can pause and ask, what exactly is this I? Where is it located? What are its qualities? Not as an intellectual exercise, but as a genuine exploration of our immediate experience. Daily interactions offer countless opportunities to observe how our sense of self inflates when praised and deflates when criticized, how it solidifies when threatened and relaxes when safe. Simply noticing these patterns, without trying to fix or change them, gradually reveals their constructed nature. Language itself reinforces our sense of separate selfhood, with I as the subject of sentences, apparently causing actions and having experiences. Some Buddhist practitioners experiment with different ways of expressing experience that don't reinforce this sense of a separate doer. Instead of "I'm feeling sad," they might note sadness is present. Instead of "I'm thinking about dinner," they might observe thoughts about dinner are arising. Modern neuroscience has begun to confirm the Buddha's insights about non-self. The brain constructs our sense of being a unified self through complex processes that can be disrupted by certain conditions. There is no single self-center in the brain, but rather multiple systems working together to create the convincing illusion of a continuous, unified entity. Even more interesting, when people practice meditation that diminishes self-referential thinking, brain areas associated with the autobiographical self show reduced activity, while areas related to direct experience and compassion become more active. The insight of non-self evolves gradually. Few people have a sudden, complete dissolution of the sense of separate selfhood. More commonly, we experience moments of greater spaciousness and freedom, glimpsing how our usual sense of self is more constructed and flexible than we realized. These glimpses accumulate over time, gradually transforming our relationship with identity. Understanding non-self doesn't mean we should stop using the word I or deny the conventional reality of personhood. The Buddha himself used personal pronouns and functioned effectively in society. The middle way he taught avoids both the extreme of believing in a permanent, separate self and the extreme of nihilistic denial of conventional identity. We can use the concept of self as a tool for navigating daily life while seeing through its ultimate substantiality. This understanding of non-self naturally connects with mindfulness, another cornerstone of Buddhist practice for relieving suffering. Mindfulness is the quality of present moment awareness that allows us to observe our experience directly, including how the sense of self is constructed and maintained. It's through this clear seeing that the insights of impermanence and non-self become transformative wisdom rather than just intellectual concepts. Mindfulness, or sati in Pali, is often described as the heart of Buddhist meditation. It's the capacity to be fully present with whatever is happening, without getting lost in reactivity, judgment, or distraction. While the concept might sound simple, developing robust mindfulness requires systematic training and practice. The good news is that this capacity is innate to every human being. We're simply cultivating what's already there. At its essence, mindfulness involves bringing clear, kind awareness to our moment-by-moment experience. This includes awareness of body sensations, emotions, thoughts, and the environment around us. The key quality is that this awareness is direct and non-conceptual. We're experiencing things as they are, not just thinking about them or getting caught in our interpretations and stories about them. What makes mindfulness such a powerful tool for transforming suffering? First, it creates space between stimulus and response. Most human suffering comes not from direct experience itself, but from our automatic reactions to it. Something happens, we feel pain, Someone criticizes us. We don't get what we want, and immediately we add layers of resistance, aversion, blame, or catastrophizing that amplify the original discomfort. Mindfulness interrupts this automatic chain reaction by bringing awareness to what's happening before we get caught in our habitual responses. Imagine stepping on a tack. There's the initial physical pain, which is unpleasant but bearable. Then the mind often adds, "This shouldn't have happened. Who left this here? Now my day is ruined." This mental reactivity can create far more suffering than the physical sensation itself. With mindfulness, we might still feel the pain, but we don't compound it with layers of resistance and narrative. We simply experience. Sharp pain is present. Tension is arising. Thoughts of blame are appearing. This direct awareness changes our relationship to the experience. Mindfulness also reveals the changing nature of all experiences. When we pay close attention to physical pain, for instance, we discover it's not a solid block, but a fluid pattern of sensations that fluctuate in intensity, location, and quality. Similarly, difficult emotions like anger or fear, when observed mindfully, show themselves to be dynamic processes rather than fixed states. This direct perception of impermanence naturally reduces suffering by showing us that no experience, however intense, is permanent. Another transformative aspect of mindfulness is its non-judgmental quality. We're not trying to evaluate experiences as good or bad, right or wrong, but simply to see them clearly as they are. This doesn't mean we lose discernment or ethical values, but that we stop the endless mental commentary that labels and judges every experience, creating unnecessary stress and reactivity. As we practice holding all experiences in this spacious awareness, we develop equanimity, the capacity to stay present and balanced with both pleasant and unpleasant experiences. Mindfulness has gained tremendous popularity in recent years, with applications ranging from stress reduction to pain management to enhanced creativity. While this mainstreaming has made these practices more accessible, it sometimes dilutes the depth of the original Buddhist understanding. In the Buddha's teaching, mindfulness isn't just about being present for its own sake or feeling more relaxed, though these are beneficial side effects. It's a key element in a comprehensive path of mental training aimed at liberating the mind from the patterns that create suffering. The formal practice of mindfulness meditation provides a laboratory for developing this quality in optimal conditions. Sitting quietly, perhaps focusing on the sensations of breathing as an anchor, we observe whatever arises in our field of awareness. When the mind wanders, as it inevitably will, we simply notice that wandering and gently return to present moment awareness, without criticism or frustration. This seemingly simple exercise builds the mental muscles of attention, awareness, and non-reactivity that we can then bring to more challenging situations in daily life. Beyond formal meditation, mindfulness can be integrated into any activity. Walking, eating, showering, conversing, working, all can be done with mindful awareness rather than on autopilot. Many people find it helpful to use routine activities as mindfulness bells, opportunities to check in with their experience. The first sip of morning coffee, stopping at red lights, or walking through doorways can serve as reminders to return to present awareness. The development of mindfulness follows a natural progression. Initially, we might only recognize that we've been lost in thought or reaction after it's been happening for some time, perhaps minutes or even hours. With continued practice, we begin to catch ourselves earlier in the process, noticing more quickly when the mind has wandered or reactivity has begun. Eventually, we develop the capacity to maintain continuous awareness, observing thoughts and emotions as they arise without being carried away by them. Modern neuroscience has begun to illuminate how mindfulness practice literally reshapes the brain. Regular meditators show increased density in brain regions associated with attention, sensory processing, and emotional regulation, while areas involved in stress reactivity become less active. The amygdala, the brain's alarm system, becomes less reactive to emotional triggers. The default mode network, associated with mind-wandering and self-referential thinking, shows reduced activity. These changes correlate with meditators' subjective reports of greater equanimity and less reactivity in the face of challenges. For those struggling with specific forms of suffering like chronic pain, anxiety, or depression, mindfulness offers particularly valuable tools. Rather than fighting against these difficult experiences, a strategy that often increases suffering, mindfulness teaches us to turn toward them with kind, curious awareness. This counterintuitive approach often leads to surprising shifts. Pain becomes more manageable when we stop tensing against it. Anxiety loses some of its grip when we observe its physical manifestations without getting caught in catastrophic thoughts. Even depression can shift when we learn to witness negative thoughts rather than believing them as absolute truths. Perhaps the most profound benefit of mindfulness is how it helps us live more fully. Much of our life passes in a blur of distraction and autopilot. We miss the actual experience of living while planning, worrying, remembering, or fantasizing. Mindfulness brings us back to the only moment we ever actually have. This one, right now, when we're truly present. We discover richness in even ordinary experiences. The taste of food, the sensation of a breeze, the subtle shifts of emotion, the miracle of breathing, all become more vivid and alive when met with full awareness. Living mindfully allows us to experience life more directly, and this balanced awareness connects perfectly with one of the Buddha's most practical teachings, the middle way. This approach to life formed the foundation of the Buddha's path from his very first discourse after enlightenment. The middle way isn't just a philosophical idea but a practical approach to living that helps us navigate the complexities of existence without creating unnecessary suffering for ourselves or others. The concept of the middle way emerged directly from the Buddha's personal experience. Before his enlightenment, Siddhartha Gautama had explored two extreme approaches in his spiritual search. First, as a prince, he had lived surrounded by luxury and sensual pleasures, finding that, despite having everything he could possibly want, a deep dissatisfaction remained. Then, after leaving the palace, he practiced extreme asceticism for 6 years, nearly starving himself to death with harsh fasting and punishing self-denial. Neither extreme brought the liberation he sought. The breakthrough came when he remembered a simple childhood experience of sitting quietly under a rose apple tree, entering a state of natural meditation. This memory revealed that the path to awakening required neither self-indulgence nor self-torture, but a balanced approach that he called the middle way. This insight proved so fundamental that the Buddha described his entire teaching as a path of balance between extremes. At its most basic level, the middle way steers between the extremes of sensual indulgence and harsh self-denial. The Buddha recognized that constantly chasing pleasant experiences creates a cycle of craving and disappointment, as no pleasure lasts forever. But he also saw that punishing the body and denying natural needs creates unnecessary suffering and actually hinders mental clarity. Instead, he advocated meeting our basic needs while not becoming obsessed with sensory pleasures, a moderate approach that supports both physical health and spiritual development. This principle of balance extends far beyond lifestyle choices to encompass our entire approach to practice and life. In meditation, for instance, the middle way manifests as balancing effort with relaxation. Push too hard with grim determination, and the mind becomes tense and resistant. Be too passive, and the mind drifts in sleepiness or distraction. The skillful meditator learns to apply just the right amount of energy, alert but not strained, relaxed but not dull. The Buddha compared this to tuning a string instrument. Too tight and the string breaks. Too loose and it won't play a melody. The middle way also applies to how we work with emotions and thoughts. Some approaches advocate suppressing difficult emotions or negative thoughts, seeing them as obstacles to overcome. Others suggest completely indulging and expressing every emotion to get it out of your system. The middle way offers a more balanced approach, acknowledging emotions fully without either suppressing or indulging them. We learn to be with anger, fear, or sadness with mindful awareness, neither pushing these emotions away nor getting swept away by them. This balanced approach extends to how we view ourselves and our practice. One extreme involves harsh self-criticism, constantly finding fault with ourselves and our efforts. The other extreme is complacent self-satisfaction that sees no need for growth or improvement. The middle way involves honest self-assessment combined with kindness and patience, recognizing areas for improvement without beating ourselves up about our imperfections. Even our understanding of reality benefits from the middle way. The Buddha pointed out two extreme views to avoid: eternalism, the belief that we have a permanent, unchanging self or soul that continues after death, and nihilism, the belief that nothing exists in any meaningful way and everything ends completely at death. The middle way understanding sees reality as neither solid and permanent nor completely non-existent, but as a flowing process of causes and conditions, neither static nor chaotic. In relationships and social engagement, the middle way offers valuable guidance. One extreme is complete isolation, withdrawing from human connection in pursuit of individual peace. The other is getting so entangled in relationships and social obligations that we have no time for inner development. The balanced approach recognizes the value of both solitude and connection, creating a lifestyle that nurtures both inner development and meaningful engagement with others. This balanced approach proves particularly helpful in our digital age, where extremes abound. We can easily swing between digital addiction, constantly checking devices and social media, and complete technophobia, rejecting all modern tools. The middle way suggests a more balanced relationship with technology, using digital tools mindfully for their benefits while setting healthy boundaries to prevent them from dominating our attention and relationships. The beauty of the middle way is its flexibility and responsiveness to circumstances. It's not about finding one perfect middle point and rigidly sticking to it. Rather, it's about developing the wisdom to recognize when we're veering toward an unhelpful extreme and adjusting accordingly. Sometimes we need more effort, sometimes more relaxation, sometimes more engagement, sometimes more solitude. The middle way is dynamic, not static. Modern psychology and neuroscience increasingly support this balanced approach. Studies show that both suppressing emotions and ruminating on them can be unhealthy, while mindful acknowledgement improves emotional regulation. Research on learning and skill development confirms that moderate, consistent practice is more effective than either exhausting overtraining or inconsistent effort. Even in physical health, moderate exercise brings more overall benefits than either sedentary living or extreme training that risks injury and burnout. The middle way doesn't mean being lukewarm or uncommitted. In fact, it often requires courage to resist the pull toward familiar extremes. Our minds tend to think in black and white terms: all or nothing, perfect or worthless, friend or enemy. It takes wisdom and strength to stand in the balanced middle, embracing nuance and complexity rather than simplistic extremes. Practically speaking, how can we apply the middle way in daily life? One approach is to regularly check in with ourselves about potential imbalances. Are we working so hard that health and relationships are suffering? Or are we perhaps using relaxation and leisure to avoid meaningful challenges? Are we so focused on helping others that we neglect self-care? Or so focused on personal development that we forget our connections and responsibilities to others? These reflections help us notice when we're veering toward extremes and make adjustments toward greater balance. We can also use physical sensations as guides. Tension, fatigue, and agitation often signal that we've moved toward an extreme. The balanced middle way typically feels sustainable, characterized by alertness without tension, relaxation without dullness, engagement without overwhelm. Our bodies often know when we've lost balance before our thinking minds recognize it. The middle way isn't about perfect balance at every moment, but about a dynamic process of continually finding our way back to center when we inevitably drift toward extremes. This ongoing adjustment develops wisdom, flexibility, and resilience that significantly reduce unnecessary suffering. By avoiding the pitfalls of rigid extremes, we discover a path that is both more effective and more joyful, allowing us to meet life's challenges with greater ease and clarity. This balanced approach naturally complements another essential Buddhist teaching for reducing suffering, the practice of compassion. While balance helps us navigate life's challenges skillfully, compassion transforms how we relate to the inevitable suffering we encounter in ourselves and others. Compassion, or karuna in Pali, is often described as the quivering of the heart in response to suffering, combined with the genuine wish to alleviate that suffering. This quality represents a radical alternative to our usual reactions to suffering, which typically involve either avoidance, turning away from pain, or aversion, feeling overwhelmed and distressed by it. Compassion offers a third way, turning towards suffering with a stable, caring presence that can hold pain without being consumed by it. In Buddhist psychology, compassion is considered one of the 4 divine abodes or Brahmaviharas, along with loving kindness, appreciative joy, and equanimity. These qualities are seen not as rare or supernatural gifts, but as innate capacities that can be deliberately cultivated through practice. Everyone has experienced moments of natural compassion, seeing a child fall and instinctively wanting to help, feeling moved by someone's grief, or wishing to ease a loved one's pain. Buddhist practice takes this natural capacity and systematically develops it until it becomes a stable quality of mind that we can bring to all situations. What makes compassion particularly powerful for transforming suffering is that it directly counteracts the self-centered patterns that amplify our distress. When we're caught in personal suffering, the mind typically contracts around me and my problem, creating a sense of isolation that intensifies the pain. Compassion opens this tight focus, helping us recognize that suffering is a universal human experience rather than a personal failure or punishment. This shift in perspective doesn't eliminate the original pain, but it removes the additional layer of suffering that comes from feeling uniquely afflicted or isolated in our struggles. The Buddha taught specific meditation practices to develop compassion. One of the most powerful is called Tonglen in Tibetan tradition, or taking and sending, and in this practice, we visualize breathing in the suffering of ourselves or others, acknowledging it fully rather than pushing it away. Then we visualize breathing out relief, ease, and whatever would help in that situation. This practice runs counter to our instinctive tendency to push away discomfort, training the mind to move towards suffering with a courageous, open heart. Modern science has begun to validate the transformative effects of compassion practice. Neuroscience research shows that regular compassion meditation strengthens brain regions associated with empathy, emotional regulation, and positive emotions. Studies find that compassion training reduces stress hormones like cortisol and increases beneficial hormones like oxytocin, often called the love hormone. People who regularly practice compassion meditation report lower levels of depression and anxiety, and greater resilience when facing difficulties. Importantly, Buddhist teachings distinguish between genuine compassion and its near enemies, emotions that might seem similar but actually operate differently. Pity, for instance, creates distance and a sense of superiority toward the suffering person. Empathic distress occurs when we so completely take on another's suffering that we become overwhelmed and unable to help. True compassion combines warm concern with enough emotional balance to remain present and effective. It acknowledges suffering without exaggerating or minimizing it, and responds with a sincere wish to help without becoming attached to specific outcomes. One of Buddhism's most revolutionary insights is that developing compassion for ourselves is just as important as compassion for others, and often more challenging. Many of us have been conditioned to view self-compassion as selfish or self-indulgent, but Buddhist psychology sees it as essential for genuine well-being and the ability to care effectively for others. Self-compassion means treating our own suffering with the same kindness we would offer to a good friend, recognizing that imperfection and struggle are part of our shared humanity. Research by Dr. Kristin Neff and others confirms that self-compassion is associated with greater emotional resilience, less anxiety and depression, healthier behaviors, and better relationships. Far from making us self-centered, self-compassion appears to give us the emotional resources to extend genuine care to others without burnout or resentment. Compassion practice begins with acknowledging suffering rather than denying or avoiding it. This takes courage, especially in cultures that often promote relentless positivity and view any acknowledgement of pain as negative thinking. The compassionate approach recognizes that suffering exists and merits attention, without adding drama or unnecessary narrative. We simply note this is painful or suffering is present and respond with care rather than criticism or avoidance. For those in helping professions or caregiver roles, compassion practice offers protection against burnout. Without compassion training, consistent exposure to others' suffering often leads either to emotional exhaustion or to psychological numbing as a defense mechanism. Compassion provides a sustainable alternative, the capacity to remain open to suffering without being overwhelmed by it. Finding the middle way between empathic distress and detachment in daily life, compassion transforms how we relate to our own mistakes and struggles. Instead of the harsh self-criticism many of us default to, "I'm so stupid. I always mess up." Compassion offers a voice of supportive understanding. "This is really difficult. It makes sense that you're struggling with this." This shift doesn't mean lowering standards or avoiding responsibility, but approaching our difficulties with kindness rather than hostility. Compassion also transforms our relationships with others, especially during conflicts. When someone acts unskillfully or causes harm, our typical reaction involves anger, judgment, or withdrawal. Compassion allows us to acknowledge the harm while also recognizing that hurtful behavior usually comes from the person's own suffering and confusion. This broader perspective helps us respond more effectively, addressing problematic behavior without demonizing the person. The most profound aspect of compassion practice is how it dissolves the illusion of separation between self and other. As we recognize that the wish to be free from suffering is universal, shared by everyone from our loved ones to people we find difficult, the boundaries between my suffering and your suffering begin to soften. This doesn't mean inappropriate merging or losing healthy boundaries, but experiencing a fundamental connection with all beings based on our shared vulnerability and shared aspiration for well-being. This compassionate response to suffering connects directly with another powerful quality of heart that the Buddha emphasized, loving kindness or metta. While compassion responds specifically to suffering, metta represents a broader quality of unconditional friendliness and goodwill that can be directed toward all beings in any circumstance, not just those who are obviously suffering. These two qualities complement each other perfectly. Compassion responds to pain with the wish to alleviate it, while loving kindness infuses all interactions with warmth and genuine care. Metta is often translated as loving kindness, but it might be better understood as a sincere wish for happiness and well-being that extends to oneself, loved ones, neutral people, difficult people, and ultimately, all beings without exception. This isn't a sentimental or passive feeling, but an active force, a genuine intention for the welfare of others that can guide our thoughts, words, and actions. In the Buddha's teachings, cultivating metta was considered so powerful that it could transform even the most negative states of mind and protect the practitioner from various forms of harm. The practice of metta begins with acknowledging a simple truth. Every being wants to be happy and free from suffering. This fundamental wish unites us with all life, from our closest friends to complete strangers, and even to those we might consider enemies. Recognizing this shared aspiration creates the foundation for genuine goodwill that transcends like and dislike, approval and disapproval. Traditional metta practice involves systematically directing well-wishes toward different categories of beings. We typically start with ourselves, which might surprise people raised in cultures that emphasize self-criticism or view self-directed kindness as selfish. But the Buddha recognized that genuine kindness toward others must be rooted in kindness toward oneself. Without this foundation, our attempts to care for others often become depleted or tinged with resentment. As the saying goes, you cannot pour from an empty cup. Cultivating metta for yourself doesn't mean indulging every desire or avoiding necessary growth. Rather, it means relating to yourself with the same basic kindness and goodwill you would naturally offer to a dear friend. It involves recognizing your fundamental worthiness of happiness independent of achievements or mistakes. This self-directed metta creates a stable foundation from which genuine care for others can naturally flow. From self-kindness, the practice traditionally expands to someone easy to love, perhaps a mentor, a supportive friend, or even a pet. We deliberately call to mind their positive qualities and sincerely wish for their happiness and welfare. The feeling of warmth and openness that arises becomes familiar, something we can recognize and strengthen with practice. The practice then gradually extends to more neutral people, acquaintances, neighbors, or colleagues we don't have strong feelings about. This step challenges us to see the humanity in those we might typically overlook or take for granted. Even the person who bags your groceries or drives past you on the highway has hopes, fears, joys, and sorrows much like your own. Recognizing this shared humanity awakens natural goodwill. The most challenging and transformative stage involves extending metta to difficult people or those with whom we have conflicts. This doesn't mean approving of harmful behavior or becoming passive in the face of injustice. Rather, it means separating the person from their unskillful actions and wishing for their ultimate well-being, which would necessarily include their becoming more wise and kind. This practice directly counteracts hatred and resentment, which harm us as much as they harm their targets. Finally, metta practice expands to include all beings everywhere, without exception. This boundless goodwill represents a radical alternative to our typical mental habits of dividing the world into those we care about and those we don't. It reflects the reality of our profound interconnection with all life and our shared fundamental wish to be happy. The formal practice of metta meditation usually involves silently repeating phrases that express these well-wishes, such as, "May you be happy," "May you be healthy," "May you be safe," "May you live with ease." These aren't magical incantations, but tools to help focus and clarify our intention. The words themselves matter less than the sincerity behind them. With regular practice, the feeling of metta becomes more accessible and can be brought into daily interactions even without formal recitation. One of the most remarkable aspects of metta practice is how it transforms the practitioner regardless of how others respond. You don't need others to know you're practicing metta, approve of your practice, or respond positively for the benefits to unfold. The primary transformation happens in your own heart and mind as habitual patterns of judgment, criticism, and indifference gradually give way to greater kindness and connection. Scientific research has begun to validate the far-reaching benefits of metta practice. Studies show that regular loving-kindness meditation increases positive emotions, decreases negative emotions, and enhances feelings of connection with others. It appears to reduce self-criticism, improve body image, and help with conditions like chronic pain, PTSD, and schizophrenia. Even brief periods of metta practice have been shown to increase feelings of social connection and positivity towards strangers. Perhaps most surprisingly, brain imaging studies suggest that loving-kindness meditation activates brain regions associated with positive emotions and maternal love. It also appears to slow aging at the cellular level by protecting telomeres, the protective caps at the end of chromosomes that typically shorten with age and stress. These findings suggest that what benefits others through kind intentions and actions simultaneously benefits ourselves at the most fundamental biological level. In daily life, metta practice might look like deliberately wishing well for people you encounter, the driver who cuts you off in traffic, the stressed cashier, the family member having a bad day. It might involve pausing before responding to an irritating email or comment, connecting with your natural goodwill rather than reacting from annoyance. It could mean actively looking for and appreciating the positive qualities in those around you, counteracting the mind's tendency to focus on flaws and annoyances. Metta doesn't ask us to approve of all actions or become passive doormats. We can maintain clear boundaries and work against harmful behaviors while still wishing for everyone's ultimate welfare. In fact, actions taken from a foundation of goodwill tend to be more effective than those motivated by hatred or righteous indignation, as they remain connected to our shared humanity rather than dehumanizing those we oppose. For those struggling with persistent anger, resentment, or hatred, metta offers a particularly powerful antidote. These negative states, while sometimes feeling justified or even righteous, ultimately cause tremendous suffering for those who harbour them. They narrow perception, increase stress hormones, and disconnect us from others. Metta practice doesn't suppress these difficult emotions, but gradually transforms them by introducing an alternative that feels better and creates more positive outcomes both internally and externally. The cultivation of loving kindness leads naturally to a quality of mind that the Buddha called equanimity, a balanced, spacious awareness that remains steady amidst life's inevitable ups and downs. Without this stabilizing quality, our goodwill and compassion might be thrown off balance by the intensity of suffering we encounter or become attached to particular outcomes. Equanimity completes and protects these heart qualities, allowing them to function optimally in all situations. Equanimity, or upekkha in Pali, is often misunderstood as cold indifference or emotional flatness. Nothing could be further from its true meaning. Genuine equanimity is fully engaged with experience but not thrown off balance by it. It combines deep caring with the wisdom to accept what cannot be changed, rather than suppressing emotions. It provides the spacious awareness that can hold even intense feelings without being overwhelmed or controlled by them. The Buddha described equanimity as a mind like a vast, clear lake that reflects everything that passes before it: clouds, birds, storms, sunshine, without distortion or resistance, yet remains unchanged by these reflections. This quality allows us to engage fully with life's joys and sorrows without the exhausting extremes of grasping at pleasant experiences or pushing away unpleasant ones. Equanimity develops as we deeply understand and accept the reality of impermanence, that everything that arises will also pass away. Pleasant experiences, no matter how wonderful, eventually end. Difficult experiences, no matter how painful, don't last forever. When we truly internalize this truth, we can enjoy pleasant moments fully without desperately trying to hold on to them, and we can face difficulties with the confidence that they too will change. Another foundation of equanimity is understanding karma, the principle that our actions create consequences. But many factors beyond our direct control also influence outcomes. We do our best with what's within our power, while accepting that we cannot control all conditions or results. This balanced perspective prevents the extremes of either passive resignation, nothing I do matters, or anxious over-control, everything depends on me. Equanimity also grows through recognizing that all beings are the owners of their actions and heirs to the results of those actions. While we can offer help and support to others, ultimately each person must walk their own path. This understanding protects compassion from turning into rescuing behavior that disempowers others or leads to personal burnout. We care deeply while respecting each person's journey and capacity. The practice of mindfulness naturally develops equanimity as we learn to observe all experiences, pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral, with the same quality of alert, non-judgmental attention. We notice how the mind habitually grasps at what it likes and pushes away what it doesn't like, creating unnecessary tension and resistance. With practice, we can let experiences be as they are, responding wisely rather than reacting automatically based on preference. Formal meditation practices specifically designed to cultivate equanimity often involve consciously reflecting on the universal nature of change and the limits of personal control. We might contemplate how all beings experience gain and loss, praise and blame, success and failure, pleasure and pain, rather than seeing these fluctuations as personal problems to be fixed. We recognize them as the natural rhythms of life that everyone faces in some form. One powerful practice involves bringing to mind various people, those we feel neutral toward, those we like, and those we find difficult, and reflecting. This person's happiness and suffering depend on their actions, not on my wishes for them. This doesn't diminish our care, but helps release the tension of over-identification with others' journeys, allowing a more spacious and sustainable compassion. Equanimity proves especially valuable during times of significant change or difficulty, when facing illness, loss, or major life transitions. This quality helps us accept what cannot be changed while maintaining the clarity to take appropriate action where possible. Instead of wasting energy fighting reality, we can direct our resources towards skillful response and adaptation. In relationships, equanimity allows love to mature beyond the initial infatuation stage into something more stable and unconditional. We can care deeply for others while accepting them as they are, without the project of trying to change them to suit our preferences. This acceptance doesn't mean approving of harmful behavior, but it does mean relating to people's fundamental humanity rather than to our idealized or demonized versions of them. Equanimity also transforms how we relate to global challenges and injustices. Without this quality, exposure to the world's problems often leads either to despair and burnout or to turning away in self-protection. Equanimity allows us to stay engaged without becoming overwhelmed, to work for positive change while accepting the complex, long-term nature of social transformation. We bring our full effort to what we can influence while releasing the burden of imagining we must personally fix everything. Modern life presents particular challenges to equanimity. The constant barrage of news, much of it alarming, social media's emphasis on dramatic emotional content, and cultural messaging that we should be able to control and optimize every aspect of life, all these factors can undermine our natural capacity for balance. Deliberately cultivating equanimity serves as a powerful antidote to these destabilizing influences. Scientific research suggests that equanimity correlates with specific brain patterns showing increased activity in regions associated with executive function and emotional regulation, along with decreased reactivity in threat response areas. People with greater equanimity demonstrate more rapid recovery from stress and more stable positive emotions, suggesting that this quality significantly contributes to psychological resilience and well-being. As with other aspects of Buddhist practice, equanimity deepens gradually through consistent attention. We might begin by simply noticing when we're caught in reactivity, grasping at pleasant experiences, pushing away unpleasant ones, or ignoring neutral experiences. This awareness itself begins to create some space around habitual patterns. We can then deliberately practice accepting things as they are in progressively more challenging situations, building the mental muscles of equanimity over time. While equanimity provides a stable foundation for our practice, we'll inevitably encounter specific mental patterns that challenge this balance and perpetuate suffering. The Buddha identified 5 particular mental states that act as major obstacles to inner peace and clarity. These are known as the 5 hindrances, and understanding how to work with them effectively is crucial for anyone seeking to reduce suffering in their lives. The Buddha didn't just point out these obstacles to make us feel bad about our minds. He recognized these patterns as universal human experiences and offered specific antidotes for each one. What makes this teaching so practical is that it helps us identify exactly what's happening when our meditation or daily life feels particularly difficult, rather than just feeling generally bad or stuck without understanding why. The first hindrance is sensory desire or craving. This isn't just about obvious addictions, but includes the mind's habitual reaching for pleasant experiences and stimulation. You might sit down to meditate and suddenly find yourself planning a delicious meal, fantasizing about a vacation, or remembering a pleasant encounter. Or in daily life, you might notice yourself constantly checking your phone for new stimulation, shopping for things you don't need, or eating when you're not hungry. This constant reaching for the next pleasant thing keeps the mind restless and dissatisfied. The traditional antidote for sensory desire involves contemplating the impermanent and ultimately unsatisfying nature of sensory pleasures. When you notice the mind grasping for something pleasant, you can gently remind yourself that no sensory experience, no matter how wonderful, provides lasting satisfaction. This doesn't mean rejecting pleasure when it naturally occurs, but rather not chasing after it as if it would provide permanent happiness. Mindfulness practice helps us observe how even the most pleasant sensations change and fade, loosening desire's grip on our minds. The second hindrance is ill will or aversion, which includes everything from mild irritation to intense hatred. This might show up during meditation as irritation with noises, physical discomfort, or intrusive thoughts. In daily life, it manifests as complaining, criticizing, blaming, and ruminating on perceived wrongs. Ill will creates a contracted, unpleasant state of mind that sees problems everywhere and misses the good that's also present. The traditional remedy for ill will is loving-kindness practice. When you notice aversion arising, you can deliberately cultivate goodwill toward yourself, the situation, or the person triggering your irritation. Even a few moments of sincere well-wishing can shift the mind from contraction to expansion. Regular loving-kindness practice gradually rewires the brain's habitual patterns, making goodwill more accessible even in challenging circumstances. The third hindrance is sloth and torpor, the heavy, dull energy that makes it hard to stay alert and engaged. During meditation, this might feel like sleepiness, mental fogginess, or the mind going blank. In daily life, it shows up as procrastination, lethargy, or checking out through excessive sleep or mindless entertainment. This state lacks the energy and clarity needed for insight and transformation. To counter sloth and torpor, the Buddha recommended several practical approaches. Physical adjustments like straightening the posture, opening the eyes, meditating while standing, or splashing cold water on the face can help. Mental adjustments include bringing attention to more stimulating meditation objects like standing or walking instead of sitting, or contemplating inspiring aspects of the teachings. Regular physical exercise, moderate eating, and sufficient but not excessive sleep also help prevent this hindrance from taking hold. The fourth hindrance is restlessness and worry, the agitated energy that keeps the mind jumping from thought to thought. In meditation, this feels like being unable to stay with the breath because the mind is buzzing with planning, worrying, or rehashing conversations. In daily life, It manifests as multitasking, difficulty being present in conversations, or lying awake at night with racing thoughts. This scattered attention makes it impossible to settle into the present moment where peace can be found. The antidote to restlessness includes practices that calm and soothe the nervous system. Focusing on the sensations of the breath at the belly rather than the chest or nostrils often helps ground scattered energy. Consciously relaxing the body, especially the hands, shoulders, and face, signals to the mind that it's safe to settle down. For persistent worries, it sometimes helps to set aside a specific worry time outside meditation, where you address practical concerns and write down necessary actions, allowing the mind to let go during practice time. The fifth hindrance is doubt, the questioning, uncertain state that undermines confidence in both the practice and your ability to benefit from it. This isn't the healthy questioning that leads to deeper understanding, but the paralyzing doubt that prevents committed engagement. During meditation, doubt sounds like, is this really working? Am I doing this right? Maybe this isn't the right technique for me. In daily life, it manifests as constantly second-guessing yourself, jumping between different practices without giving any of them a proper chance, or talking yourself out of beneficial habits. The traditional antidote for doubt is study and discussion of the teachings with knowledgeable practitioners, along with reflecting on your own positive experiences with practice. Remembering times when meditation helped you, even in small ways, builds confidence. Finding a trustworthy teacher or community can provide guidance when doubt arises. Sometimes the most powerful approach is to acknowledge doubt's presence but commit to practicing anyway, seeing what happens when you move forward despite uncertainty. What makes working with the hindrances transformative is recognizing that they're not personal failings but universal aspects of the human mind. Every practitioner encounters them, from beginners to advanced meditators. The difference lies not in whether they arise, but in how quickly we recognize them and how skillfully we respond. With practice, we learn to spot these patterns earlier, before they fully take over the mind. The hindrances also provide valuable information about our particular patterns and tendencies. Some people struggle more with desire, others with aversion, others with dullness or restlessness. Noticing your most common hindrances helps you understand your mind's habitual strategies and prepare appropriate responses. This self-knowledge becomes a foundation for more targeted practice. Perhaps most importantly, working with the hindrances transforms our relationship with difficulty. Rather than seeing challenging mental states as problems to eliminate, we learn to view them as opportunities to develop wisdom and skill. Each time we recognize and work skillfully with a hindrance, we strengthen the mental muscles of mindfulness and equanimity. Over time, the hindrances themselves become some of our most powerful teachers. As we develop skill in recognizing and working with these 5 mental patterns, we naturally move toward a more integrated approach to practice. The Buddha didn't offer disconnected techniques, but a comprehensive path that addresses every aspect of human experience. This complete system for transforming suffering is called the Noble Eightfold Path. The Noble Eightfold Path represents the Buddha's practical blueprint for living a life that progressively reduces suffering and increases genuine happiness. What makes this path particularly powerful is its comprehensiveness. It addresses how we understand reality, how we relate to others, and how we work with our own minds. It's not just about meditation or philosophical understanding, but about transforming every aspect of how we live. Despite its name, the Eightfold Path isn't meant to be followed in a linear sequence. Instead, its 8 aspects develop together, supporting and strengthening one another. Think of it more like growing a garden where multiple plants develop simultaneously, rather than climbing a ladder one rung at a time. Each factor of the path influences and is influenced by the others, creating a dynamic process of growth. The path begins with right view, which means understanding reality accurately, particularly in terms of suffering and its causes. This doesn't require blind faith or complex philosophy, but a practical recognition of how our actions create consequences, how attachment leads to disappointment, and how everything is interconnected and changing. Right view provides the compass that orients all our other efforts in a beneficial direction. Right view naturally leads to right intention, consciously choosing motivations that reduce suffering rather than increase it. The Buddha highlighted 3 specific intentions: renunciation, letting go of harmful attachments; goodwill, wishing well for all beings; and harmlessness, compassion in action. These healthy motivations set the foundation for everything that follows, ensuring our efforts are aligned with our deepest values. The next 3 factors address our outward behavior and relationships. Right speech involves communicating in ways that create clarity and connection rather than confusion and division. This includes speaking truthfully, kindly, helpfully, and at appropriate times. It also means being mindful of digital communication, where hasty or reactive messages can cause tremendous harm. Right speech acknowledges the immense power of words to either heal or wound. Right action extends these principles to our physical behavior, encouraging actions that express care and respect rather than harm and exploitation. The basic ethical guidelines include not killing, not stealing, not engaging in sexual misconduct, and not using substances in ways that cloud awareness and lead to harmful choices, rather than seeing these as restrictive rules. Buddhist practice views them as expressions of wisdom and compassion that protect both ourselves and others from unnecessary suffering. Right livelihood recognizes that how we earn our living occupies much of our time and energy, deeply influencing our mind states and relationships. The Buddha encouraged work that contributes to the welfare of society rather than exploiting or harming others. In modern terms, this invites us to examine whether our work aligns with our values and contributes something beneficial to the world, or whether it involves practices that we know cause suffering. When our livelihood supports our spiritual values, our entire life becomes more integrated. The final 3 factors focus directly on mental training. Right effort addresses how we use our energy, encouraging us to prevent and reduce harmful mind states while cultivating and maintaining beneficial ones. This balanced effort avoids both straining too hard, which creates tension, and not trying enough, which leads to stagnation. It's about working with our minds persistently but gently, like learning any other skill. Right. Mindfulness involves developing clear awareness of what's happening in our body, feelings, mind states, and mental processes. This quality of non-judgmental attention allows us to see our patterns clearly without getting caught in reactivity or denial. Regular mindfulness practice, both formal and informal, trains the mind to stay present with experience rather than constantly getting lost in regrets about the past or worries about the future. Right concentration completes the path by developing the mind's ability to stay focused on a chosen object without distraction. This creates a stable, clear quality of awareness that can penetrate deeply into the nature of experience. Concentration practice traditionally involves working with progressively more refined states of meditation, jhanas, that temporarily suspend the hindrances and create optimal conditions for insight. What makes the Eightfold Path so effective for reducing suffering is that it addresses the problem from multiple angles simultaneously. It's like treating a complex illness with a comprehensive approach that includes proper diagnosis, lifestyle changes, medication, and therapy, rather than relying on a single intervention. By working with understanding, motivation, behavior, and mental training together, we create the conditions for genuine and lasting transformation. The Eightfold Path can be applied at different levels depending on a person's interest and commitment. Even incorporating a few aspects, like being more mindful of speech or developing greater awareness of mental patterns, can significantly reduce everyday suffering. For those drawn to deeper practice, The path offers a framework for complete transformation leading to the highest levels of freedom described in Buddhist teachings. Modern psychological research has increasingly validated many aspects of this ancient path. Mindfulness practices have been shown to reduce stress, anxiety, and depression while improving focus and emotional regulation. Ethical behavior promotes better relationships and reduced guilt and anxiety. Clarifying values and aligning actions with them increases overall life satisfaction. The Buddha's prescription for human flourishing turns out to be remarkably aligned with what contemporary well-being research has discovered. What makes the Eightfold Path especially relevant in today's world is that it addresses both individual and collective suffering. As we develop greater awareness, kindness, and ethical sensitivity in our own lives, we naturally contribute to healthier relationships, communities, and societies. The path teaches us to take responsibility for our own minds while recognizing our profound interconnection with all life. Following the comprehensive approach of the Eightfold Path, we naturally encounter an important concept that underlies much of Buddhist understanding, the principle of karma. While often misunderstood in popular culture as a system of cosmic rewards and punishments, the Buddha's teachings on karma offer a much more practical and empowering perspective on how our choices shape our experience and how we can transform patterns of suffering. Karma, which literally means action in Sanskrit, refers to the natural law of cause and effect that operates in our lives. The Buddha wasn't the first to talk about karma. The concept existed in Indian thought before him, but he refined the understanding in significant ways. Rather than focusing on ritual actions or rigid destiny, he emphasized the crucial role of intention behind our actions. In his teaching, it's not just what we do that creates karma, but why we do it, the mental state from which our actions arise. The basic principle is straightforward. Actions motivated by greed, hatred, or delusion tend to create suffering for ourselves and others, while actions motivated by generosity, kindness, and wisdom tend to create happiness and well-being. This operates as a natural law, not as divine judgment or punishment. Just as planting apple seeds reliably produces apple trees, not orange trees, our intentional actions produce corresponding results according to their nature. Karma operates through many channels. Most directly, our actions shape our mental habits. Every time we act from anger, we strengthen the tendency to respond with anger in the future. Every time we respond with patience, we make patience more accessible next time. Our minds are constantly being conditioned by our choices, creating patterns that become increasingly automatic over time. Karma also works through our relationships and social environments. When we treat others with hostility or manipulation, we create distrust and distance, contributing to a lonely, threatening social world. When we act with honesty and kindness, we tend to create relationships characterized by trust and support. The social worlds we experience aren't random but partially shaped by how we've chosen to treat others. Even our physical experiences are influenced by karma, though less directly and with many other factors involved. Habits like smoking, excessive drinking, or chronic stress create physical conditions that affect our health and comfort. Similarly, habits of exercise, moderation, and relaxation tend to support physical well-being. While karma isn't the only factor affecting physical health, genetics, environment, and random events all play roles. Our choices certainly influence our bodily experience. A common misunderstanding about karma is that it implies everything happening to us now is our fault due to past actions. The Buddha explicitly rejected this view, explaining that current experiences arise from countless causes and conditions, only some of which relate to our past choices. Illness, accidents, and being harmed by others can happen regardless of how ethically we've lived. The key insight is not that we control everything that happens to us, but that we always have a choice in how we respond to what happens. This understanding of karma empowers us to take responsibility for our lives without falling into excessive guilt about the past or anxiety about the future. When difficult experiences arise, instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" we can ask more productive questions like, "How am I contributing to this situation?" And "How can I respond skillfully from this point forward?" This shifts us from a victim mentality to a creator mindset, focusing on what we can actually influence. Karma also explains why similar external circumstances can create vastly different experiences for different people. Two people might face the same challenge, a job loss, a health issue, a relationship conflict, yet respond in completely different ways based on their established mental habits. One person might react with blame, self-pity, and catastrophizing, creating intense suffering beyond the original difficulty. Another might respond with acceptance, creative problem-solving, and seeking support, experiencing much less additional suffering. These different responses reflect karmic patterns developed through countless previous choices. Understanding karma helps us respond more effectively to painful situations. When we recognize that much of our suffering comes from our habitual reactions rather than from events themselves, we gain a crucial point of intervention. We can't control everything that happens, but we can work with our responses, gradually replacing unskillful habits with more beneficial ones. This process might be slow. Deeply ingrained patterns don't change overnight, but even small shifts can significantly reduce suffering over time. The concept of karma extends beyond a single lifetime in traditional Buddhist teachings, which describe how unresolved tendencies and intentions continue from one life to the next. While this aspect may be difficult for some modern practitioners to accept literally, the core insight remains valuable even without belief in rebirth. Our actions have consequences that extend far beyond their immediate effects, influencing our future experiences in profound ways. Whether these consequences unfold within one lifetime or across multiple lives, the principle of cause and effect remains consistent. Working skillfully with karma doesn't mean becoming paralyzed with worry about creating bad karma. The Buddha encouraged a balanced, compassionate approach that includes forgiveness for past mistakes and determination to make better choices going forward. When we understand that unskillful actions came from ignorance and confusion rather than evil intent, we can hold ourselves accountable without harsh judgment, creating conditions for genuine growth and healing. For those struggling with guilt about past actions, the Buddha offered practical guidance. First, recognize the harmful action and its effects, taking full responsibility without minimizing or rationalizing. Then, make amends where possible, directly addressing any damage caused. Next, commit to acting differently in the future, perhaps establishing specific practices to support this commitment. Finally, forgive yourself and move forward, recognizing that dwelling endlessly on past mistakes only creates more suffering without benefiting anyone. Karma isn't just about avoiding harmful actions, but actively cultivating beneficial ones. The Buddha encouraged generosity, ethical conduct, meditation, honoring parents and teachers, supporting those in need, and sharing wisdom as actions that create positive conditions both internally and externally. These wholesome actions gradually transform our mental landscape, making states like peace, joy, and compassion more accessible while reducing the grip of anger, greed, and confusion. Understanding karma also helps us maintain equanimity when we see others acting harmfully without apparent consequences, or when people doing good seem to suffer unfairly. We recognize that results often unfold over long timeframes and through complex pathways not immediately visible. Rather than becoming cynical or despairing about injustice, we can maintain confidence in the principle that actions have consequences according to their nature, even when those consequences aren't immediately apparent. Ultimately, The teaching of karma empowers us to become active participants in creating our experience rather than passive victims of circumstance. By understanding how our intentions and actions shape our reality, we gain access to profound transformation. Each moment offers a fresh opportunity to choose differently, to respond with greater awareness and kindness. Over time, these choices create new patterns that lead to greater freedom from suffering and increased capacity for genuine happiness. This understanding of karma naturally leads us to explore practices that help us see these cause and effect relationships more clearly in our own experience. One of the most powerful and direct methods for developing this clarity is Vipassana meditation, sometimes called insight meditation. This practice trains us to observe our experience with such precision and equanimity that we begin to see directly how suffering is created and how it can be released. Vipassana represents one of the oldest and most central meditation techniques in the Buddhist tradition. The word itself means clear seeing or special seeing, pointing to its purpose, developing a penetrating awareness that sees beyond surface appearances into the true nature of experience. While concentration practices calm and focus the mind, Vipassana uses this focused mind to investigate reality directly, leading to liberating insights that transform our relationship with suffering. The practice begins simply enough. After establishing some degree of mental stability, often through mindfulness of breathing, the meditator expands awareness to include all aspects of experience as they arise and pass away: physical sensations, sounds, thoughts, emotions, and the knowing of these experiences. Unlike concentration practices that maintain focus on a single object, Vipassana involves a more fluid, comprehensive awareness that observes the changing flow of experience without getting caught in any particular content. What makes Vipassana powerful is its emphasis on seeing three fundamental characteristics that the Buddha identified in all conditioned experiences. First, impermanence, anicca, the fact that every experience is in constant flux, arising and passing away moment by moment. Second, unsatisfactoriness or suffering potential, dukkha, recognizing how attachment to changing experiences inevitably leads to disappointment. Third, non-self, anatta, seeing that within the flow of experience, there is no solid, permanent entity that could be called a self, just continuous processes unfolding according to conditions. The practice involves bringing curious, kind attention to whatever is most prominent in experience right now, without trying to control or change it. If physical sensations dominate awareness, you notice their changing qualities: pressure, temperature, movement, intensity, without getting caught in stories about them. If emotions arise, you observe their energy and feeling tone as they express in the body, noting their impermanent nature. If thoughts flood the mind, you recognize thinking without getting absorbed in the content, seeing thoughts as mental events rather than absolute truths or commands requiring action. This might sound simple, but it represents a radical departure from our usual way of relating to experience. Typically, we're completely identified with our thoughts and feelings, taking them personally and reacting automatically based on like and dislike. Vipassana trains us to step back slightly, creating enough space to observe these processes without being completely caught in them. This small gap between experience and reaction is where freedom becomes possible. As practice deepens, we begin to see patterns that weren't previously visible. We notice how physical sensations trigger emotions, how emotions trigger thoughts, how thoughts trigger more emotions, creating complex feedback loops that can escalate into suffering. We observe how the mind constantly categorizes experiences as pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, and how these basic evaluations quickly generate craving or aversion. We see how identification, the sense of "this is me" or "this is mine," creates particular intensity and stickiness in certain experiences. Perhaps most importantly, we begin to recognize the difference between primary experience and the added layers of reaction. When physical pain arises, for example, we can distinguish between the raw sensations themselves and our mental resistance, fear, or stories about the pain. This distinction proves crucial because while we often can't control the primary experience, we have much more choice about our relationship to it. As the saying goes, pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. Vipassana practice unfolds through stages, though not in a rigid linear sequence. Initially, we're often surprised by how busy and chaotic our minds are, a discovery that can be discouraging but actually represents important insight. As concentration strengthens, we begin to observe patterns more clearly, often seeing how our suffering is created through identification with changing experiences. With continued practice, insights tend to deepen, affecting our understanding at more fundamental levels and gradually transforming our relationship with all experience. One of the most significant shifts occurs as we begin to disidentify with the contents of awareness. Rather than being a solid self having experiences, we recognize ourselves as the open awareness within which all experiences arise and pass. This perspective shift from being the waves to being the ocean creates tremendous freedom. Difficulties still arise, but they're held in a more spacious context where they don't define or overwhelm us. Traditional Vipassana retreats provide intensive training in this practice, with participants meditating for many hours daily in a structured, supportive environment. The sustained attention possible in retreat conditions often accelerates insight and allows for deeper levels of investigation. However, regular daily practice, even for shorter periods, can still develop significant insight over time. Many practitioners find a combination works well, regular daily sitting supplemented by occasional longer retreats. The beauty of Vipassana is that it doesn't require adopting any belief system or philosophy. It's an empirical practice that invites direct investigation of your own experience. The insights arise not from accepting doctrines, but from seeing clearly what's already happening moment by moment. This makes it accessible across cultural and religious boundaries. Anyone can observe their experience and discover these patterns for themselves. The benefits of Vipassana extend far beyond the meditation cushion. As we develop the habit of observing experience without immediate reactivity, we naturally bring this quality into daily life. Challenging situations that previously triggered automatic reactions now include a crucial moment of awareness before responding. This doesn't mean suppressing natural emotions or becoming detached from life, but rather engaging more fully with a clarity that allows wiser choices. Scientific research on insight meditation has documented numerous benefits, including reduced stress and anxiety, improved attention and emotional regulation, decreased rumination, and greater self-compassion. Brain imaging studies show changes in regions associated with self-awareness, emotional processing, and attention regulation. While these benefits aren't the primary goal of traditional practice, they represent significant improvements in quality of life that often accompany deeper insight. What makes Vipassana particularly powerful for transforming suffering is that it addresses the root causes rather than just managing symptoms. Instead of trying to fix specific problems or achieve particular states, it develops a fundamental shift in how we relate to all experience. This shift doesn't happen overnight. It's a gradual process of seeing more and more clearly how we create unnecessary suffering and naturally letting go of those patterns as their futility becomes obvious through direct observation. While Vipassana offers a comprehensive framework for investigating all aspects of experience, the Buddha also taught more focused meditation techniques that serve as gateways to insight. One of the most fundamental and widely practiced of these is Anapanasati, or mindfulness of breathing. This practice is so central to Buddhist meditation that the Buddha himself reportedly used it both to achieve his own enlightenment and as a primary teaching throughout his life. Far from being just a preliminary technique for beginners, mindfulness of breathing can lead to the deepest levels of meditation and insight when developed fully. Anapanasati begins with something universally available to every living person, the natural process of breathing. As long as we're alive, the breath continues, making it an ideal anchor for attention that's always accessible, regardless of circumstances. Unlike many meditation objects that might be pleasant or unpleasant, the breath is typically neutral, helping us develop equanimity and reducing the tendency to chase pleasure or avoid discomfort during practice. The Buddha outlined this practice in the Anapanasati Sutta, describing 16 stages that progressively develop both concentration and insight. In its simplest form, the practice involves bringing attention to the physical sensations of breathing, perhaps noticing the feeling of air entering and leaving the nostrils, or the rising and falling movement of the abdomen. When the mind wanders, which it inevitably will, you simply notice that wandering and gently return attention to the breath, without criticism or frustration. What makes this seemingly simple practice so powerful is the quality of attention you bring to it. Rather than forcing concentration or trying to control the breath, you're developing a delicate balance of focus and receptivity. You're training the mind to stay present with experience as it unfolds, moment by moment, without getting lost in thoughts about the past or future. This basic mental skill forms the foundation for all Buddhist meditation practices and for bringing mindful awareness into daily life. As concentration deepens through regular practice, you begin to notice subtler aspects of the breathing process, perhaps the brief pauses between inhale and exhale, the changing quality of sensations throughout each breath, or how the breath reflects your current mental and emotional state. Without deliberately trying to change anything, the breath often naturally becomes calmer and more refined simply through the act of paying attention. This natural calming illustrates an important principle in Buddhist practice. Awareness itself can be transformative, even without deliberate intervention. The Buddha described how mindfulness of breathing, when developed and pursued, fulfills 4 foundations of mindfulness: awareness of the body, feelings, mind states, and mental processes. As you continue practicing, you naturally begin to notice how physical sensations connect to emotions, how emotions influence thoughts, and how all these aspects of experience arise and pass away in an interconnected flow. What begins as simple attention to breathing gradually expands into comprehensive awareness of the entire mind-body process. One of the most valuable aspects of breath meditation is how it serves as a real-time feedback system about your mental state. When anxious or stressed, the breath typically becomes shallow and rapid. When angry, it might become forceful and irregular. When relaxed, it tends to be deeper and smoother. By returning attention to the breath throughout the day, you gain an immediate window into your current condition and an opportunity to shift toward greater calm and clarity before reactions escalate. The practice also develops concentration in a balanced way. Unlike techniques that force the mind into rigid focus, mindfulness of breathing cultivates a more sustainable attention that's both stable and flexible. The mind learns to stay with the chosen object while remaining responsive to changing conditions. This quality of concentration supports daily activities requiring sustained attention while reducing the mental fatigue that often comes from forced focus. For those dealing with anxiety, panic, or stress-related conditions, breath meditation offers particularly valuable tools. The breath connects directly with the autonomic nervous system, forming a bridge between conscious awareness and unconscious bodily processes. By working with the breath, you can influence stress responses that typically operate below conscious control. Even a few minutes of mindful breathing can shift the nervous system from fight or flight mode toward rest and digest, reducing stress hormones and their harmful effects on physical and mental health. Regular practice of Anapanasati creates a foundation for emotional stability by strengthening what neuroscientists call interoception, awareness of internal bodily sensations. Research shows that people with better interoceptive awareness typically have stronger emotional regulation skills, as they can detect emotional responses in their early stages before they become overwhelming. By tracking subtle changes in the breath and body, you develop early warning systems for emotional reactivity and tools for returning to balance. As practice deepens, many people discover that the breath serves as a perfect microcosm for studying the nature of all experience. Within this simple, everyday process, you can observe the three characteristics the Buddha identified: impermanence, the breath constantly changes; unsatisfactoriness, trying to control or freeze the breath creates tension; and non-self, breathing continues without a controller, responding to changing conditions. These insights about the breath naturally extend to understanding other aspects of experience, supporting the deeper wisdom that leads to freedom from suffering. The beauty of breath meditation lies partly in its accessibility. While some meditation techniques require specific conditions or extensive instruction, mindfulness of breathing can be practiced anywhere, at any time. You might formally sit for 20 or 30 minutes daily to develop the skill, but you can also practice briefly throughout the day, while waiting in line, during a challenging conversation, or before making an important decision. This integration into daily life helps bridge the gap between formal meditation and moment-to-moment awareness. Scientific research has extensively validated the benefits of breath-focused meditation. Studies show improvements in attention, emotional regulation, stress response, immune function, and even changes in brain structure and function with regular practice. Particularly well documented are reductions in anxiety and rumination, which form core components of many forms of suffering. These findings align with what Buddhist practitioners have observed for centuries, that this seemingly simple practice creates profound shifts in how we experience ourselves and the world. For those interested in exploring Anapanasati, starting with just 5 to 10 minutes daily of simple breath awareness can establish the foundation. Finding a comfortable but alert position, bringing gentle attention to the natural process of breathing, and patiently returning to the breath whenever the mind wanders. This basic practice gradually develops both concentration and insight. As comfort with the practice grows, you might extend the duration or explore the subtler aspects of the experience as described in the traditional instructions. The insights and skills developed through mindfulness of breathing naturally extend to one of the most challenging aspects of human experience, working with difficult emotions. While the breath serves as a relatively neutral anchor for developing awareness, emotions like anger, fear, grief, and desire present more challenging territory for practice. Yet learning to meet these intense experiences with mindful awareness represents one of the most liberating applications of Buddhist practice. The Buddhist approach to difficult emotions differs significantly from common strategies most people employ. We typically either suppress emotions, pushing them down and trying to ignore them, act them out, expressing them in potentially harmful ways, or ruminate on them, getting caught in repetitive thinking that amplifies the original emotion. None of these approaches leads to genuine transformation. Buddhist practice offers a middle path, acknowledging emotions fully while relating to them with mindful awareness rather than identification or rejection. This approach begins with recognizing that emotions are compound experiences involving physical sensations, mental images, thought patterns, and often unconscious beliefs. When anger arises, for instance, there might be heat in the face, tightness in the chest, mental images of confrontation, thoughts about being wronged, and perhaps underlying beliefs about deserving better treatment. By breaking down the emotion into these components, what initially seems like an overwhelming flood becomes a collection of workable experiences that can be observed with some degree of objectivity. The body provides a crucial entry point for working skillfully with emotions. Physical sensations are generally easier to observe objectively than thoughts or mental states. when caught in a difficult emotion. Bringing attention to the body, perhaps noticing tension, heat, coldness, or movement, helps establish enough distance to avoid being completely identified with the emotional state. Rather than being anger, you're experiencing sensations that come with anger. This slight shift in perspective creates space for choice rather than automatic reactivity. Labeling emotions can also help create this observational stance. Simply noting anger is present or fear is arising interrupts the usual pattern of becoming the emotion and acting from within it. The language matters here. Saying, "I am angry," reinforces identification with the state, while anger is present helps maintain perspective. This doesn't deny the reality of the emotion, but shifts how we relate to it, from complete absorption to mindful acknowledgement. Another key insight in the Buddhist approach is recognizing the impermanent nature of emotions. Even the most intense feelings naturally rise and fall like waves if we don't feed them with repetitive thinking. Much of our suffering comes not from the initial emotional response, but from how we perpetuate and amplify it through stories, judgments, and resistance. By observing how emotions naturally change and eventually pass, we develop confidence in our capacity to be with difficult feelings without being overtaken by them. The practice of RAIN, developed by modern meditation teachers based on traditional Buddhist approaches, offers a structured way to work with difficult emotions. The acronym stands for recognize, clearly acknowledging what's arising; allow, permitting the experience to be there without fighting it; investigate, exploring the emotion with kind curiosity, especially its bodily manifestations; and nurture or non-identify, bringing compassion to yourself and recognizing that the emotion is a passing state, not your identity. This process helps transform our relationship with emotions from adversarial to compassionate. Rather than seeing difficult emotions as enemies to eliminate, we learn to view them as messengers carrying important information. Anger might signal a boundary violation that needs addressing. Fear might highlight genuine danger or unresolved past trauma. Grief acknowledges meaningful loss. By listening to these messages with discernment rather than immediately reacting or suppressing, we gain wisdom about appropriate responses to various situations. Buddhist practice also recognizes the importance of understanding the underlying causes of our emotional patterns. Many difficult emotions stem from three fundamental roots that the Buddha identified: greed, wanting what we don't have; hatred, rejecting what is present; and delusion, misunderstanding the nature of reality. By recognizing which of these roots feeds a particular emotional pattern, we can apply appropriate antidotes: generosity and contentment for greed, loving kindness for hatred, and clear seeing for delusion. For particularly challenging or trauma-based emotional patterns, Buddhist approaches often work best in conjunction with appropriate therapeutic support. While meditation develops helpful skills for emotional regulation, some patterns require additional resources and guidance, especially when they stem from significant trauma or psychiatric conditions. The Buddha himself emphasized meeting practitioners where they are and providing appropriate teachings for their specific situations. The ultimate aim of working with difficult emotions isn't to eliminate them entirely, but to transform our relationship with them. Emotions are natural aspects of human experience, and even advanced practitioners experience the full range of human feelings. The difference lies in not being controlled by these states, having emotions rather than being had by them. This transformed relationship allows emotions to move through us without creating the additional suffering that comes from identification, suppression, or unskillful expression. As we practice working mindfully with emotions, we often discover that what makes emotions difficult isn't their inherent nature, but our resistance to experiencing them. When we create space to feel anger, fear, or sadness fully but mindfully, these emotions often reveal deeper dimensions and even transform naturally into wisdom. Anger touched with mindfulness might reveal clear discernment about injustice. Fear met with compassionate awareness might show us what we truly value. Grief embraced with presence might open into profound appreciation and love. This compassionate approach to difficult emotions naturally leads us to examine one of their most common triggers in modern life, the feeling of discontent and constant wanting. In a world designed to stimulate desire at every turn, the Buddhist practice of cultivating contentment, santushti, offers a revolutionary alternative to the endless cycle of craving that drives so much of our suffering. Contentment in Buddhist practice doesn't mean passive resignation or giving up on improving your life circumstances. Rather, it represents a radical shift in perspective, the ability to find satisfaction and peace with what is already present, while still engaging in purposeful action. This quality directly counteracts the pervasive discontent that the Buddha identified as a primary cause of suffering, where we're constantly focused on what's missing rather than appreciating what's here. Our modern consumer culture functions largely by creating and amplifying discontent. The average person today encounters thousands of advertisements daily, each carefully designed to make us feel that something is lacking in our lives. Social media platforms similarly trigger comparison and feelings of inadequacy as we scroll through carefully curated highlights of others' lives. Even our entertainment often revolves around acquiring wealth, status, or perfect relationships as the path to happiness. Surrounded by these messages, it's no wonder that persistent dissatisfaction feels normal rather than recognizing it as a conditioned state. The Buddha observed this pattern of discontent 25 centuries ago, noting how the mind habitually focuses on what it doesn't have rather than appreciating what it does. He described the human condition using the image of a thirsty person drinking salt water. The more we consume based on craving, the thirstier we become. Each acquisition or achievement provides only temporary satisfaction before the mind moves on to wanting something else. Today's new phone becomes tomorrow's outdated model. The job promotion we worked so hard for quickly becomes our new normal. The relationship we longed for reveals its inevitable challenges. This isn't to say that material comforts, achievements, or relationships are problematic in themselves. The issue lies in our relationship to them, specifically, the belief that obtaining them will provide lasting happiness. Buddhist psychology identifies this as a fundamental misunderstanding of how satisfaction actually works. Real contentment comes not from having specific circumstances, but from how we relate to whatever circumstances we have. This insight offers tremendous freedom, as it places happiness within our control rather than depending on external conditions that often remain beyond our influence. Practically speaking, how do we develop this quality of contentment in a world designed to make us feel perpetually inadequate? One approach involves regularly reflecting on sufficiency and abundance rather than scarcity. Each day, we might take time to notice what's already working in our lives, basic needs that are met, relationships that provide support, abilities we've developed, positive qualities we embody. This isn't forced positivity or denial of real challenges, but a deliberate counterbalance to the mind's default negativity bias that typically overlooks what's going well. Gratitude practices similarly help shift attention from what's lacking to what's present. Research shows that regularly noting things we appreciate actually rewires neural pathways, making contentment more accessible over time. Even in difficult circumstances, we can usually find small elements to appreciate: the functioning of our body, the natural world, moments of kindness we've experienced. This practice doesn't require dramatic life changes, but a subtle shift in where we place our attention. Mindfulness supports contentment by helping us fully experience what's already here. Often we're so busy planning future pleasures or worrying about what might happen that we miss the simple satisfactions available in the present moment: the taste of food, the comfort of shelter, the beauty of light changing throughout the day. By bringing full awareness to ordinary experiences, we discover richness that typically goes unnoticed when attention is scattered. Another powerful practice involves distinguishing between needs and wants. Modern marketing deliberately blurs this line, transforming luxuries into perceived necessities. By clearly identifying what genuinely contributes to our well-being versus what simply feeds momentary desires, we can make more conscious choices about where to direct our resources and energy. This clarity often leads naturally to simpler living that supports greater contentment. The Buddhist tradition also recommends the practice of enoughness, consciously recognizing when we have sufficient food, clothing, shelter, and other resources rather than automatically seeking more. This might look like pausing before making a purchase to ask whether it genuinely serves well-being or just momentary craving, or noticing when we've eaten enough rather than continuing until uncomfortably full, or recognizing when we have enough information before continuing to scroll news feeds or social media. Contemplating impermanence contributes significantly to contentment by helping us recognize the fleeting nature of both pleasant and unpleasant circumstances. When we deeply understand that nothing lasts, neither difficulties nor pleasures, we're less likely to place our happiness on changing conditions. Instead, we develop the capacity to be present with whatever arises, finding peace in the midst of constant change rather than only when conditions meet our preferences. The Buddha also recommended regular exposure to those who have less than we do as an antidote to discontent based on comparison. Today, this might include volunteer work with disadvantaged populations or learning about living conditions in less privileged parts of the world. The point isn't to feel guilty about what we have, but to gain perspective that challenges our sense of entitlement and not enough that drives so much suffering. For those seeking to develop greater contentment, media consumption deserves particular attention. News feeds, social media, and entertainment choices significantly influence our sense of what's normal, what's necessary, and what we're lacking. Consciously choosing media that doesn't trigger comparison and craving, limiting exposure to advertising, and regularly unplugging completely can create space for natural contentment to emerge. Many practitioners find that periodic digital fasts, a day, a weekend, or longer without screens, restore a sense of presence and sufficiency that gets clouded with constant connectivity. What makes contentment such a radical practice in our culture is how it challenges the economic systems built on stimulating endless desire. When we find satisfaction in simple pleasures, meaningful relationships, and inner development rather than constant consumption, we naturally step outside the cycle of working more to earn more to buy more that defines modern life for many people. This shift not only reduces personal suffering but contributes to more sustainable ways of living collectively. The wonderful paradox of cultivating contentment is that people who develop this quality often accomplish more meaningful goals than those driven by discontent, without the exhausting cycle of craving and temporary satisfaction. They have more energy available for purposeful action. By acting from a sense of fullness rather than lack, their efforts have a different quality, more joyful, more sustainable, and often more effective. Contentment doesn't diminish motivation, but transforms its nature from desperate grasping to engaged, purposeful participation in life. This quality of contentment connects naturally with another powerful Buddhist practice for reducing suffering, the cultivation of generosity, or dana. While contentment helps us find peace with what we have, generosity involves the joyful sharing of our resources, time, and energy with others. These two practices complement each other perfectly, with contentment preventing generosity from becoming depleting, and generosity preventing contentment from becoming complacent or self-centered. Generosity occupies a special place in Buddhist practice as the first of the paramitas or perfections, qualities that develop through spiritual practice and lead to awakening. The Buddha frequently described generosity as the beginning of the path, a foundation upon which other aspects of practice can develop. This prominent placement might surprise those who think of Buddhism primarily in terms of meditation techniques, but it reflects the Buddha's understanding of how attachment creates suffering and how giving directly loosens these bonds. At its essence, Generosity counters the mind's habitual tendency to hold on, accumulate, and protect what it considers mine. Each act of giving represents a small but significant challenge to the sense of separate self that lies at the root of suffering. When we share resources, time, or kindness without expectation of return, we experience moments of freedom from self-preoccupation and glimpse the joy that comes from interconnection rather than isolation. Traditional Buddhist teachings identify 3 levels of generosity, each representing a deepening of the practice. The first and most basic involves giving with some expectation of return, perhaps anticipating gratitude, recognition, or future assistance when needed. The second level involves giving without expecting anything in return, but still retaining some sense of "I am the giver and they are the recipient." The highest level involves giving with the clear understanding that giver, gift, and recipient are not separate, just aspects of an interconnected flow of life supporting itself. While this might sound abstract, many people have glimpsed this experience during moments of spontaneous, joyful giving. Contrary to what our acquisitive culture might suggest, neuroscience confirms that giving activates pleasure centers in the brain more reliably than receiving does. Studies consistently find that spending money on others produces more happiness than spending it on ourselves, and that volunteers report greater life satisfaction than non-volunteers. These findings align perfectly with Buddhist psychology, which has long recognized that generosity directly produces well-being rather than diminishing it as our self-protective instincts might fear. Importantly, Buddhist teachings emphasize that the benefits of generosity depend more on the intention behind giving than on the quantity given. A small gift offered with genuine care and joyful intention creates more positive internal conditions than a large donation given reluctantly or for recognition. This understanding makes the practice of generosity accessible to everyone regardless of material resources. Someone with very limited means who shares what they can with a genuine heart benefits more internally than a wealthy person who gives large sums primarily for tax advantages or social status. The practice of generosity extends far beyond material gifts to include many forms of giving. We can be generous with our time, listening fully to others rather than waiting for our turn to speak. We can share knowledge and skills, helping others develop their capabilities. We can offer emotional support during difficult times. We can give the gift of forgiveness, releasing others and ourselves from the burden of past mistakes. We can extend patience when someone is learning or struggling. Each of these expressions of generosity directly counters the contracted, fearful state of mind that creates suffering. For those seeking to develop greater generosity, starting with small regular acts often proves more transformative than occasional grand gestures. Perhaps beginning each day with the intention to be generous, then noticing opportunities as they naturally arise, holding a door, offering a compliment, sharing food, letting someone go ahead in line. These seemingly minor actions gradually reshape our relationship with giving, moving it from an occasional special event to a basic orientation toward life. The practice can deepen through more intentional giving. Many Buddhist practitioners commit to regular donations to causes that benefit others, regardless of fluctuations in their financial situation. Others volunteer time consistently rather than only when convenient. Some commit to sharing knowledge or skills freely in their communities. The key element is consistency, building giving into the structure of life rather than leaving it to occasional impulse or convenience. Generosity practice also invites us to examine our fears around giving. Many of us unconsciously believe that we don't have enough to share or that giving will somehow deplete us. When we notice these fears arising, we can investigate them with mindful awareness rather than either acting on them automatically or judging ourselves for having them. Often these fears reflect early experiences or cultural conditioning rather than current reality. By gently challenging these beliefs through incremental acts of giving, we discover that generosity typically creates abundance rather than scarcity in our lives. The relationship between generosity and non-attachment works in both directions. Giving helps loosen our grip on possessions, time, and even identity simultaneously. As we develop greater non-attachment through other practices like meditation, giving becomes more natural and joyful. We begin to recognize that we never truly own anything. We're temporary stewards of resources that flow through our lives. This perspective makes sharing feel like the most natural expression of our interconnection rather than a sacrifice or loss. In a world increasingly characterized by individualism and self-protection, the practice of generosity represents a radical alternative, a way of being that recognizes how our well-being is inextricably linked with that of others. Each act of giving, however small, ripples outward with effects we cannot fully track or measure. Yet the immediate effect within our own consciousness, the spaciousness and joy that replace contracted fear and holding, provides direct evidence of generosity's power to transform suffering into well-being, separation into connection. While individual practices like generosity create immediate benefits, the Buddha recognized that spiritual growth rarely happens in isolation. This understanding led him to emphasize the vital importance of community, or Sangha, as an essential support for anyone seeking to reduce suffering in their lives. In fact, the Buddha considered the Sangha so fundamental that he included it as one of the three jewels, along with the Buddha, awakened awareness, and the Dharma, teachings, in which practitioners take refuge at the beginning of their journey. The traditional meaning of Sangha refers specifically to the community of monastics who have dedicated their lives to practice and teaching. In contemporary usage, particularly in Western contexts, the term has expanded to include all sincere practitioners supporting each other on the path. Either way, the essential function remains the same, providing the conditions, relationships, and structures that make sustained transformation possible. Human beings are inherently social creatures, deeply influenced by those around us. Even the most determined practitioner will struggle to maintain mindfulness, ethical conduct, and wisdom when surrounded by people who don't share or support these values. Conversely, regular contact with others committed to awareness and compassion naturally strengthens these qualities in ourselves. The people we spend time with shape our sense of what's normal, what's possible, and what's worth pursuing, making spiritual community one of the most powerful influences on our development. The Sangha serves several crucial functions in supporting the reduction of suffering. First, it provides practical guidance and teachings that would be difficult or impossible to discover alone. While books, videos, and apps offer valuable information, they cannot respond to our specific questions, challenges, and misunderstandings the way experienced practitioners can. Having access to others who have walked the path longer than we have, particularly those who have worked through similar obstacles, prevents us from getting stuck in confusion or unhelpful practices. Community also offers essential feedback that helps us recognize our blind spots. We all have aspects of ourselves that remain invisible to our own awareness, patterns, biases, and tendencies that others can see more clearly than we can. A healthy spiritual community provides mirrors that reflect both our strengths and areas for growth, delivered with kindness rather than judgment. This feedback function helps prevent spiritual practice from becoming another form of self-deception or reinforcing existing patterns rather than transforming them. Perhaps most importantly, the Sangha provides inspiration and evidence that transformation is possible. When we witness genuine change in others, seeing how they've become more patient, compassionate, or equanimous through practice, it strengthens our own commitment and confidence. Conversely, trying to practice without such examples can feel like attempting to reach a destination without evidence that anyone has actually arrived there. The living examples within a community make the abstract promises of the teachings concrete and believable. The supportive function of community becomes particularly crucial during challenging periods. Everyone encounters obstacles in practice, periods of doubt, loss of motivation, difficult life circumstances that make practice seem impossible, or confusing experiences that arise in meditation. During these times, the Sangha serves as a container that holds us when our individual capacity feels insufficient. Others can remind us of our deeper intentions when we've temporarily lost sight of them, encourage us when our energy falters, and normalize the challenges as natural parts of the path rather than signs of failure. The Buddha emphasized the importance of admirable friendship, Kalyanamitta, as a cornerstone of spiritual life. These aren't just pleasant social connections, but relationships characterized by mutual commitment to awakening. Admirable friends inspire us by their example, offer honest feedback without harshness, remind us of our highest aspirations when we forget, and provide practical support for our practice. The Buddha went so far as to say that admirable friendship constitutes the whole of the spiritual life, a statement that highlights how central supportive relationships are to genuine transformation. Modern research in psychology and neuroscience strongly supports this ancient understanding of community's role in personal change. Studies consistently show that social connection represents one of the strongest predictors of resilience, well-being, and even physical health. Behaviors and attitudes spread through social networks in ways that significantly influence our choices, often below the level of conscious awareness. Trying to make major life changes without supportive relationships dramatically reduces the likelihood of success, whether the goal involves meditation practice, ethical development, or any other form of positive change. For contemporary practitioners, finding or creating appropriate community often requires intention and effort. Unlike traditional Buddhist cultures where supportive structures existed throughout society, many modern practitioners must actively seek out or build communities that support their values and practices. This might involve joining an established meditation center or temple, participating in regular group sites, attending retreats, or even creating informal practice groups with like-minded friends. Online communities can also provide valuable connection, particularly for those in locations without access to in-person Sangha. Though face-to-face interaction offers benefits that digital connection alone cannot provide, the quality and health of the community matters tremendously. Not all groups that call themselves spiritual communities actually function in supportive ways. Healthy Sanghas maintain a balance between structure and flexibility, offering clear teachings and practices while respecting individual differences and needs. They create space for questions and doubts rather than demanding blind faith. They distribute power and responsibility appropriately rather than centralizing everything in a single authority figure. They welcome feedback and can adapt to changing circumstances while maintaining connection to the essence of the tradition. Participation in Sangha, like other aspects of practice, requires finding a middle path between extremes. Some practitioners become overly dependent on community, unable to maintain practice without constant external support and approval. Others resist engagement with community due to past hurts, individualistic conditioning, or fear of group dynamics. The balanced approach involves recognizing our interdependence and need for support while continuing to develop our capacity for independent practice and discernment. For those with past negative experiences in religious or group settings, approaching spiritual community may require particular care and discernment. The Buddha encouraged testing teachings and teachers rather than accepting them based on authority or tradition. This advice applies equally to communities. Observing how people treat each other, how power operates, how conflicts are addressed, and how diversity is handled provides valuable information about whether a particular Sangha will support genuine spiritual development or potentially cause harm. Ultimately, the test of a healthy Sangha lies in whether it helps members reduce suffering through developing greater awareness, compassion, and wisdom. A community that increases stress, judgment, or confusion, or that creates unhealthy dependency, isn't fulfilling the true function of Sangha regardless of its external forms or claims. Finding or creating community that genuinely supports the reduction of suffering represents one of the most important and rewarding aspects of Buddhist practice in the contemporary world. The understanding of Sangha's importance naturally leads us to consider how Buddhist practices can be effectively integrated into modern life more broadly. For many contemporary practitioners, the question isn't whether these ancient teachings offer valuable tools for reducing suffering. Experience and research increasingly confirm that they do, but how to implement them within the complex realities of 21st century existence. With its roots in a pre-industrial, Asian monastic context, Buddhism requires thoughtful adaptation to serve practitioners living in very different circumstances. This process of adaptation isn't new. Buddhism has always evolved as it moved between cultures, finding fresh expressions while maintaining its essential insights. From its origins in India to its development in China, Tibet, Thailand, Japan, and now Western countries, the teachings have been continuously translated not just linguistically but culturally. Today's practitioners participate in this ongoing evolution as they discover how timeless wisdom can address contemporary suffering. One of the primary challenges involves time and scheduling in our busy, often overcommitted lives. Few modern laypeople can dedicate several hours daily to formal meditation as monastics might. Adapting to this reality might involve shorter but more consistent practice periods, perhaps 20 minutes of morning meditation rather than none at all because an hour seems impossible. It might mean integrating mindfulness into daily activities like commuting, cooking, or exercising when dedicated sitting time is limited. Many practitioners find that even brief formal practice creates a foundation that allows mindfulness to extend more easily into everyday activities. The physical environments of contemporary life present another challenge. Most of us live and work in spaces filled with distractions, notifications, and stimulation very different from the simplicity of traditional practice settings. Creating even small areas dedicated to practice, perhaps a corner of a room with a cushion or chair where devices are left behind, can help establish boundaries between practice time and the rest of life. Some practitioners establish rituals that mark transitions, like lighting a candle or ringing a bell, helping the mind recognize that it's entering a different mode of being despite remaining in the same physical space. Digital technology presents both obstacles and opportunities for contemporary practice. On one hand, constant connectivity, notifications, and entertainment options can fragment attention and reinforce exactly the patterns of craving and distraction that meditation aims to address. On the other hand, apps, online communities, and digital teachings provide access to resources that would have been unimaginable to practitioners in earlier eras. Finding a balanced relationship with technology, using it skillfully to support practice without letting it undermine presence, represents a distinctly modern challenge that requires mindful discernment rather than either rejection or uncritical adoption. Work life dominates many people's waking hours in ways that can either support or hinder practice. The Buddha's teaching on right livelihood traditionally focused on avoiding professions that directly caused harm. Contemporary practitioners might extend this reflection to consider not just what their work produces, but how it affects their mind states, relationships, and capacity for presence. Some find ways to bring mindfulness directly into work activities, whether through brief moments of awareness between tasks, mindful communication with colleagues, or applying principles like non-attachment to workplace challenges. Others make more significant changes to align their careers more closely with values of compassion and awareness. Family responsibilities present both challenges and opportunities for integrating Buddhist practice. Parents of young children, caregivers for elderly relatives, or those balancing multiple roles may find extended retreat or lengthy daily practice sessions impractical. Yet these relationships also offer powerful opportunities to develop patience, selfless service, and present moment awareness. Many practitioners discover that family life provides the perfect laboratory for testing whether their meditation cushion insights translate into how they respond to a child's tantrum, a partner's stress, or an aging parent's needs. The individualistic orientation of modern Western culture sometimes clashes with Buddhism's emphasis on interconnection and non-self. Practitioners may find themselves navigating between authentic spiritual development and the subtle ways spiritual practice can be co-opted by the ego or consumer mentality, becoming just another achievement or identity marker rather than a genuine path of transformation. Maintaining connection with traditional teachings and authentic community helps prevent this distortion. Keeping practice focused on reducing suffering rather than enhancing self-image. Cultural differences between Buddhism's Asian origins and contemporary Western contexts require thoughtful navigation. Some traditional practices and perspectives may feel accessible and relevant immediately, while others might seem alien or require reinterpretation to be meaningful. The challenge lies in discerning which elements represent essential insights that transcend cultural context and which are cultural expressions that can be adapted without losing the core teaching. This discernment develops through study of traditional teachings, guidance from experienced teachers, and honest examination of how practices actually affect one's suffering and well-being. Perhaps the most important principle for integrating Buddhism into modern life is starting where you actually are, not where you think you should be. Many beginners feel overwhelmed comparing themselves to monastic ideals or even long-term lay practitioners. The Buddha himself emphasized meeting each person at their current level of understanding and capacity, offering appropriate teachings for their circumstances. This might mean beginning with just 5 minutes of daily meditation, practicing mindfulness in one specific daily activity, or focusing initially on generosity and ethical conduct before formal meditation. The beauty of Buddhist practice lies in its scalability and adaptability. Even small, consistent steps gradually create significant changes in how we experience life and suffering. A few mindful breaths during a stressful meeting, a moment of kind intention toward a difficult person, or brief recognition of impermanence when facing disappointment, these modest practices, applied consistently in daily life, begin to transform our relationship with suffering. Over time, these small moments accumulate, gradually reshaping our neural pathways, emotional patterns, and fundamental understanding of ourselves and reality. As we integrate these practices into our modern lives, we eventually encounter a profound insight at the heart of Buddhist teaching, the understanding of non-self, anatta. This teaching offers the most direct and radical approach to eliminating suffering by addressing its very root cause, our identification with a limited, separate self. While practices like mindfulness, compassion, and ethical behavior significantly reduce suffering, the Buddha taught that complete freedom requires this deeper realization that challenges our most fundamental assumptions about who and what we are. The concept of non-self often creates confusion because it seems to contradict our everyday experience. After all, we each have a name, a history, preferences, and relationships that seem to confirm our existence as distinct individuals. The Buddha wasn't denying this conventional level of identity that allows us to function in the world. Rather, he was pointing to the absence of a permanent, unchanging, independent self at the core of our experience, what we might call the essential me that we assume is running the show and owning our experiences. When we look closely at our experience through meditation and inquiry, something surprising happens. We cannot actually locate this solid self that we've assumed exists. The body is constantly changing, cells dying and regenerating. Thoughts arise and pass without our choosing them. Emotions flow through based on countless conditions. Perceptions register without a perceiver separate from the perceiving. Even our sense of being a consistent personality reveals itself as a collection of habitual patterns rather than a fixed essence. What we call self turns out to be more like a process than an entity. more like a verb than a noun. This investigation isn't just a philosophical exercise, but a practical approach to freedom. The Buddha observed that suffering occurs precisely when we identify with aspects of experience as me or mine and then fight to protect, promote, or preserve this constructed identity. We suffer when the body ages or becomes ill because I am this body. We suffer when criticized because I am my reputation. We suffer when thoughts are troubling because I am my thoughts. The sense of being a separate self that needs constant protection creates an exhausting and ultimately unwinnable battle against the natural flow of impermanent phenomena. The practice of non-self involves systematically investigating our experience to see where we're creating unnecessary suffering through identification. For instance, when physical pain arises, we observe how the simple sensations themselves are manageable. But the addition of thoughts like my pain and this shouldn't be happening to me creates a second layer of mental anguish. When criticism occurs, we notice how taking it personally as an attack on me amplifies the hurt far beyond the original words. When achievements don't bring lasting satisfaction, we recognize how the belief that I will be complete when I accomplish this set us up for disappointment. This investigation happens both in formal meditation and daily life. In meditation, we might systematically explore the 5 aggregates that the Buddha identified as what we typically take to be self: physical form, sensations, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. As we observe each of these aspects closely, we discover that none of them is stable or independent enough to be considered a self. They're all in constant flux, arising based on conditions rather than from a central controller. For example, we might focus on thoughts, a primary source of self-identification. Through sustained attention, we notice that thoughts appear in consciousness without being summoned, influenced by countless factors from recent conversations to physical states to random associations. We don't actually create our thoughts, they emerge based on conditions. Yet we habitually claim certain thoughts as mine while rejecting others as not me, creating an artificial boundary that becomes a source of conflict and suffering. In daily life, the practice involves noticing moments of strong self-identification and investigating them with gentle curiosity. When we feel defensive, offended, or especially proud, these emotions often signal attachment to a particular self-image. Instead of being carried away by the emotion, we can pause and ask, what am I identifying with right now? What image of myself am I trying to protect or promote? This simple inquiry begins to loosen the grip of identification, creating space between experience and our automatic claiming of it as personal. Language itself reinforces the sense of separate self, with I as the subject of most sentences, apparently controlling actions and having experiences. Some practitioners experiment with different ways of describing experience that don't reinforce this sense of a central doer. Instead of, I'm feeling anxious, they might note, anxiety is present. Instead of, I'm meditating, they might recognize, meditation is happening. This isn't about denying conventional identity, but about loosening the unconscious grip of language patterns that reinforce suffering. The practice of non-self tends to unfold gradually. Few people have a sudden, complete dissolution of the sense of separate self, though such experiences do occur. More commonly, poor practitioners experience moments of greater spaciousness and freedom, glimpses of life without the constant burden of self-concern. These moments might come during meditation, in nature, during creative flow states, in deep connection with others, or even during challenging experiences when the usual self-protection temporarily drops away. These glimpses accumulate, gradually transforming our relationship with identity. What makes the non-self teaching particularly radical is that it directly challenges what most of us consider most precious and fundamental, our sense of being a distinct, special individual. Many spiritual paths promise to fulfill or perfect the self. The Buddhist approach suggests that real freedom comes from seeing through the illusion of separate selfhood altogether. This doesn't mean losing functional identity or becoming unable to navigate daily life. Rather, it means holding identity much more lightly, as a useful convention rather than an absolute truth. The fruits of this practice show themselves in practical ways. As identification loosens, we experience greater ease with life's inevitable changes since there's less sense of a fixed self being threatened by them. We take things less personally, reducing reactivity and conflict in relationships. We feel less compelled to constantly prove or defend ourselves, creating more authentic connections with others. Decision-making often becomes clearer as choices are based on wisdom and compassion rather than protection of self-image. Even physical pain and illness become less overwhelming when not compounded by the extra suffering of taking them personally. Paradoxically, as the grip of separate self-identity relaxes, many report experiencing greater aliveness, joy, and connection, rather than diminishing experience. Seeing through the confines of me and mine appears to expand it. Without the constant filter of self-reference, is this good for me? How do I look? What does this mean about me? Life can be met more directly and fully. Compassion flows more naturally when the artificial boundary between self and other thins. Creativity and intuition often flourish when less constrained by self-consciousness. The progressive realization of non-self represents one of the most liberating aspects of Buddhist practice, addressing suffering at its very root rather than just managing its symptoms. By gradually seeing through our fundamental misidentification with temporary phenomena, we discover a freedom that doesn't depend on circumstances being a particular way. This freedom isn't something we achieve or obtain, but rather what reveals itself as the unnecessary constraints of identification fall away. This profound understanding of non-self leads naturally to the Buddha's teaching on the ultimate goal of practice, nirvana, the complete cessation of suffering. While the word nirvana has entered popular culture often associated with blissful pleasure or heavenly realms, the Buddha's actual description was much more precise and practical. He defined nirvana not as a place or special experience, but as the complete extinction of the mental fires that create suffering, specifically greed, hatred, and delusion. Nirvana literally means blowing out or extinguishing, like a flame that goes out when it no longer has fuel. This doesn't mean the annihilation of the person, but the cessation of the psychological patterns that generate suffering. The Buddha compared it to a fire going out. The fire doesn't go anywhere. It simply stops burning when its conditions are removed. Similarly, suffering doesn't go somewhere else. It simply stops arising when its causes are uprooted through practice. This distinction is crucial for understanding what Buddhist practice aims at. Many spiritual paths promise extraordinary experiences, bliss states, visions, special powers, or heavenly realms after death. The Buddha's approach was radically different. He focused on the practical elimination of suffering here and now through understanding its causes and removing them. Nirvana isn't something exotic or otherworldly, but the natural state of the mind when no longer disturbed by the afflictions that typically dominate it. The Buddha was notably reticent about describing nirvana in positive terms, preferring to define it by what it's not: the absence of greed, hatred, delusion, and the suffering they cause. This approach prevented followers from creating new objects of craving or concepts to cling to. When pressed for descriptions, he occasionally used terms like the unborn, the unconditioned, or the deathless to indicate its nature beyond the usual patterns of arising and passing away that characterize ordinary experience. While full nirvana might seem distant from our current experience, the Buddha described the path as gradual. with progressive stages of awakening that reduce suffering along the way. The first glimpse of nirvana, called stream entry, involves a clear experiential understanding of the Four Noble Truths and a significant weakening of the belief in a separate, permanent self. This initial awakening might be subtle externally, but represents a profound internal shift, like a train that has changed tracks and will inevitably reach a different destination, even if slowly. Further stages involve progressively weakening and then completely uprooting the mental patterns that cause suffering. Sensory desire and aversion become less gripping and eventually fall away entirely. Subtler attachments to form, formless states, conceit, restlessness, and ignorance dissolve in later stages. The fully awakened person, an arahant in the earliest Buddhist terminology, experiences complete freedom from suffering regardless of external circumstances, having cut the root causes that generate it. Importantly, the Buddha emphasized that nirvana isn't separate from our ordinary lives, but represents a transformed relationship with the same experience. The awakened person still sees forms, hears sounds, has thoughts, and experiences sensations. The difference lies in no longer relating to these experiences through the lens of a separate self that must get what it wants and avoid what it doesn't want. Without this fundamental distortion, experience flows naturally without creating the additional layer of suffering that comes from craving and aversion. This understanding of nirvana addresses a common misconception that Buddhist practice aims at some kind of passive detachment or emotional flatness. The Buddha described the awakened state not as devoid of feeling, but as characterized by immense peace, compassion, and clarity. Without the constant agitation of self-centered concerns, the mind naturally expresses qualities like kindness, generosity, and appropriate responsiveness to situations. These positive qualities flow more freely precisely because they're no longer constrained by self-protection and habitual reactivity. Nirvana also doesn't mean withdrawal from life or relationships. The Buddha himself, after his awakening, spent 45 years actively teaching, establishing communities, and engaging with people from all walks of life. Complete freedom from suffering enables fuller participation in life rather than escape from it. Without the burden of self-concern, awakened beings naturally express care for others' welfare and work to reduce suffering where possible, while maintaining equanimity when conditions cannot be changed. For most practitioners, the path to nirvana unfolds gradually over time through consistent practice. The Buddha compared it to the wearing away of an axe handle through regular use, so gradual it can't be observed day by day. But eventually the transformation is complete. This process involves both sudden insights that shift understanding and the patient cultivation of qualities like mindfulness, compassion, and wisdom that allow those insights to fully penetrate all aspects of life. The teachings suggest several indicators that show progress toward nirvana, even before its complete realization. These include diminishing reactivity to challenging situations, reduced identification with thoughts and emotions, greater spontaneous compassion, increasing equanimity amid life's ups and downs, and less preoccupation with self-image and comparison to others. The gradual fading of greed, hatred, and delusion manifests as greater peace, kindness, and clarity in daily life, signs that the path is bearing fruit even before reaching its culmination. What makes the Buddha's teaching on nirvana particularly valuable is its empirical nature. Rather than requiring belief in metaphysical claims or divine intervention, it invites investigation of our own experience to see how suffering arises and how it can cease. The path doesn't demand blind faith but offers testable principles. When we grasp at pleasurable experiences, does that create lasting satisfaction or eventual disappointment? When we resist uncomfortable experiences, does that eliminate them or add a layer of mental anguish? When we identify strongly with thoughts and emotions as me and mine, does that create freedom or constriction? Through honest investigation of these questions in our own lives, we begin to verify the Buddha's insights about the causes of suffering and the possibility of its cessation. Each small moment of letting go, releasing an expectation, accepting a disappointment without adding resistance, responding with kindness instead of anger, gives us a tiny taste of the freedom that nirvana represents in its fullness. These moments accumulate, gradually transforming our relationship with all experience and pointing toward the possibility of complete liberation from suffering. The Buddha's teaching on nirvana offers a radical vision of human potential, that complete freedom from psychological suffering is possible in this very life through understanding and transforming the mind. This vision doesn't require supernatural beliefs or special status, but is available to anyone willing to undertake the journey of self-examination and practice. In a world where many have concluded that anxiety, stress, and dissatisfaction are simply inevitable parts of the human condition, the possibility of their complete cessation represents perhaps the most hopeful and revolutionary aspect of the Buddha's teachings on eliminating suffering.